Right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
We're glad everybody could join us. Make sure you are muted to begin with. We will start here actually in just 1 minute. We've got a very, very packed agenda and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So give it 1 more minute as people are admitted to the meeting, and then we'll get started with a few quick logistics and announcements, roll call, and agenda overview before the meeting starts. When you get a chance, pull up the staff PowerPoint slide we have. Please.
Camera's right there, so it's kind of hard.
Okay. And since it's 10:01, we're going to jump right in. Welcome everybody to the DCYF Oversight Board meeting for August. A few just logistical things to cover that we have. If I have my notes are all over the place. If you're a member of the public and you would like to identify yourself in the chat box, please do so. That is not required, it is a voluntary option. We are also going to disable the chat box after these voluntary introductions for the rest of the meeting. This is a change from our past meeting, but this is mostly to make sure that we're in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act, since previously there'd be a lot of conversation going on in the chat box, and we have decided that we are going to disable that, and that you are allowed to message me or Nicholas individually. So if there's anything that comes up, feel free to reach out to us in chat box. It just won't be open to everybody, and that's just to make sure everything that is stated in the meeting is heard on the phone as well. And then if you are a member of the public, just a reminder, this is a DCYF Oversight Board meeting, which is for the board members and presenters to engage. But if you would like to make a public comment, we do have a public comment time period on our agenda. And you can notify Nicholas that you'd like to participate in that by emailing him. If you are connecting via Zoom on this,
this is disrespectful of everybody's
just a
time.
reminder to mute everybody. Please mute your computers.
Clear about what we need to.
And so if you want to email Nicholas to participate in public comment, when we get to that period on the agenda, he will call individuals off one by one. If you are joining by Zoom, you will see his email on the screen. If you're joining by phone, you can find his email on our website, which is DCYF Oversight Board, DCYFoversight.wa.gov. So with that, I'm going to jump into a couple quick announcements. Our last meeting, we came up with a statement from the board on the call to racial justice that is published and on our website. So same website, DCYFoversight.wa.gov. So if anyone's interested in seeing it, it's there on the home page. We've also been able to upload video archives of all of our meetings that have been online since April. So if you go to our homepage for our website, there will be a tab on the upper right that says video archive, and you can go and watch any of those previous meetings. For board members, we have our co-chair elections that are going to be coming up in November of this year. So in October, we'll be sending out more communications around that, but in our October meeting, we will ask for names for those that might be nominated, and then we'll do the actual process of nominations and elections during the November meeting. And then also a side note about November, due to the timeline for our submission of our annual report, we are going to move that meeting. It's, I believe, currently scheduled for November 19th, so we're going to move it up a little bit. And Nicholas and I will be sending out a doodle poll after this meeting to capture availability of board members to get the right time in that first 2 weeks of November that would be appropriate. So with that, I'm going to do a quick agenda overview. Then we'll do board member roll call and review of meeting minutes from our last 2 meetings, since we had a special meeting, and I'll hand it over to the co-chairs at that point. So just a quick review of our agenda. Again, like I said, we have a very packed agenda today. I'm very excited for everyone that we have here that's going to present and participate. We are going to hear from a number of young people that are currently residing in juvenile rehabilitation facilities across the state. We're very excited about that experience. They've been able to have an opportunity to select from topics that they wish to talk to the board about. We do not plan to have live Q&A during this meeting out of respect of that preparation, but board members will be able to submit questions after the fact that we will then facilitate that back and forth with the young people, if they want to respond in writing or come back to a meeting and respond and have further engagement. After that, we'll talk to JR and hear a number of updates on different issues going on, particularly reentry efforts during the pandemic, since things have changed due to the pandemic changes, updates on JR to 25, implementation, the future of facilities, and more. And we have a number of people from JR that will be presenting, including, we're very excited to have Jennifer Redmond, the superintendent of Green Hill, and Yolanda Lee, the administrator of Oak Ridge Community Facility, will be participating along with JR leadership, which we're very fortunate for. Then we'll hear from the Washington Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice, both the council chair, Gordon McHenry Jr., and the vice chair, Sean Good. They will present the Partnership Council to the board as more of an introduction, who they are, the work they do, particularly focus on their priorities over this last year, and then we will talk a little bit about opportunities for the partnership to partner with the Oversight Board and the work that we do if there's opportunities there. Then we'll have our public comment. Followed up by that, we will have a data briefing follow-up from Dr. Vicky Ybarra. She presented to the board back in July on a lot of requests for racial and ethnic disproportionality and disparities data. The board had a lot of follow-up questions. There's some really good, interesting information there that we want to make sure we invited Dr. Ybarra back to just to go through that and engage with the board as a follow-up. And then finally, we will hear from Allison Kretzinger from DCYF on the legislative agenda for the department for our 2021 session. And then we will adjourn. So again, packed agenda. Thank you everyone for being here. I would like to now do a quick roll call for board members. So as usual, I'm going to ask you when I call your name to unmute and say present so I can mark you down. And then we'll request a motion for approval of the minutes from our last two meetings. So to start, we have Katie Byron.
Present.
Okay. Annie Blackledge.
Present.
Thank you, Annie. Senator John Braun. Okay, Bobby Bridge.
Present.
Thank you. Senator Jeannie Darnio. Representative Tom Dent. I think I saw him on here, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, Tom Dent's here.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Ben DeHaan.
Good morning. I'm here.
Good morning, Ben. Sydney Forrester.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sydney. Lonnie Greniger.
Present. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Lonnie. Ruth Kagi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Ruth. Annie Lee. I think she said she's on vacation. Dr. Diane Levy.
And Libby's here.
Charles Loeffler.
Present.
Hi, Charles. Lois Martin.
Present. Good morning, all.
Good morning, Lois. Shonda Slivanoff.
Present.
Hey, Shonda. Representative Tana Sen.
Here.
Good morning. Wendy Thomas. Okay. And then Assistant Attorney General Stacia Haller, are you on the call as well?
I am.
Hi, Stacia. Thank you. Okay, so with that, Nicholas, can you pull up real quick? We have two, as I mentioned, two series of meeting minutes to request motions for approval. We have the July 16th meeting, which was focused on the call for racial justice. And then we did have a special meeting as a board on July 27th, which is when we finalized the statement itself. So with that, I will make a request for a motion if anyone would like to do so.
This is Lois.
Diane Levy, I
So moved.
motion to approve.
I heard Diane and Lois.
I'll move mine to a second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion?
This is Tana. I would just point out that staff and attendance, on one of them, you have Krista, and one of them, oh, I thought it both had Stacia. I apologize. I take that back.
Okay.
Call the question.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. Okay. Meeting minutes are passed. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our co-chairs to do opening remarks before we start with our first agenda item. Thank you, everybody, for your participation so far.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Nicholas, for helping coordinate this. I am very excited about today's agenda. Hearing voices from the community and from youth at JR is something that this board has been very committed to, is making sure that we do hear voices. And of course, it has become a little bit more difficult, shall we say, to do that given COVID and that we're all at home. And so I appreciate that while we're not traveling around the state, that we're able to bring voices to this group. Also know that JR has been an important topic that we have all been looking forward to covering. And so I'm excited to hear, again, youth perspective from staff and then from advocates, additional advocates out in the field working in this space. I would like to note that I guess we can do this at closing remarks, but you know, while COVID is going on, hopefully we'll hear the real impacts of what's going on in the facilities for young people as well from COVID. But there's so much going on with DCYF, and I know there's been lots of requests to move around the agenda, add things so that we're addressing COVID, but we also are trying to stay focused and make sure that we get to all the key topics that the Oversight Board has wanted to cover over time, and that we do that and trying to balance with the COVID situation. So I thank everybody for their patience and their continuing input. But I'm looking forward to our topics today. So with that, Ruth, do you have anything you wanted to say at this point?
Well, I just want to second that. I know that the youth voice in the legislature has been extremely powerful and has led the legislature to make many policy changes. So I'm very, very pleased we have the opportunity to hear from youth today. Thank you for being with us.
Indeed. And with that, I will turn it over to JR staff who are going to facilitate, because we're at a number of different locations. I do also want to point out that one speaker will have some closed caption work, and so if there's a little bit of a delay, I would just ask people to pause and give a little grace on patience, and we will make sure that we are accommodating all those who need accommodation. So thanks so much, and again, I'll turn it over to the JR staff.
Hi, this is Rebecca Kelly. Good morning, everyone. I'm the Acting Assistant Secretary for Juvenile Rehabilitation, and just want to do a quick introduction of the four youth who will be speaking. They're going to further introduce themselves as well. I'm just going to say we're so excited both for the board's interest in hearing from the voices of these youth, and also for you four youth who are speaking today, the young people who are across the of Washington we're really grateful for you stepping up, speaking publicly in front of a board over Zoom. We know it's a big deal, and we thank you for your time and commitment to this and preparing your thoughts for this for your notes today. So like I said, the four young people will each introduce themselves, and first will be Sergio from Green Hill School. Currently that's in Chehalis. Then second will be Summer at Echo Glen in Snoqualmie. Third is Billy, who's coming to us from Twin Rivers in Richland. And then fourth will be Deontay, who's currently at Oak Ridge in Lakewood. So Sergio, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can take it away.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Sergio Salgado. I'm 19 years old. I'm from King County, and I'm a resident here at Green Hill School. Can you guys hear me? All right, cool. I'm a resident here at Green Hill School. I'm under DOC, and I'm under here by the new law, and I'm thankful for this law. I'll be able to serve a majority of my time here, and I'll be able to go to a group home later when my time is almost finished. But the topic I chose to speak about today is the job readiness and education opportunities that are provided here at Green Hill. I first want to say, prior to my arrival here, I was at the King County Jail, and while I was there, I received my high school diploma. And so when I got here, the college opportunities that were open to me, I took advantage of them. There was little college courses that I could take, but there's stuff in the works that they're working on because of the new JR 25 changes. And there's the regular school education, which is, those are the two education opportunities that are here. The college and the high school education. One vocation job readiness opportunity that is provided here is the new program, which is a pre-apprenticeship program that teaches construction-based skills. I haven't participated in that myself, but I soon plan to. I got a lot of time to plan and to just focus on myself and what I want to do with my future. But that's one job readiness opportunity that is provided here. After completion of that 12-week program, you get 3 certifications that you can have when you leave here that'll help you find a job when you get out. And so I heard nothing but good things about that from people that I know. And, you know, some people were inspired to pursue a construction career. And so I just can't wait to participate in that group myself. Another job readiness opportunity is a program called My Jobs. And My Jobs is like, teaches you life skills about career exploration, you know, how to build a resume, what to expect on a job application, how to fill out a job application. And I signed up for that one, but especially with COVID, a lot of things got shut down. But I'm looking forward to this, and I feel like this will be really beneficial to me and the ones who take advantage of it and seek this opportunity. And then there's the basic employment opportunities here at Green Hill. The working in the kitchen, working in the laundry, working in the maintenance, the work crew and stuff like that, security. And with these jobs, they help develop good work ethic, you know, how to be responsible, how to be on time, how to be respectful. I personally work with security, so I'm like an assistant with security. It's a very trustworthy job. You have to build trust. You have to be respectful and be responsible. Like I said, the work ethic plays a big role in that. I get along with the staff there really well, and it takes a lot of trust to work there, confidentiality, because there's things that, you know, just got to stay confidential. But it also helps me with my communication skills because I'm working in like a professional environment, working with adults every day. It's just helping me personally. I go in there every day and, you know, just get ready to work. I do custodial type work and stuff like that. I'm just there with whatever they need. And that's pretty much it. But I'm really thankful to be here at Green Hill, to be given the opportunity to speak today and, you know, just share a couple of things that I know. I just got here, but I soon plan to just take advantage of everything that Green Hill has to offer. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Sergio.
Thank you.
Okay, Summer, it's on to you.
Hi, my name's Summer. I'm 19 and I'm at Echo Glen. I was able to get my diploma here. It took a while though because we didn't have a good school system and nobody was really concerned that I wasn't enrolled in the classes that I needed. And so we had a student advocate that worked here that was able to help me get all the classes that I needed. But it did take a long time for me to graduate, but I was able to get my diploma. I'm not really sure what this meeting is. I did write down a lot of answers to the questions that I was asked, so I'm just letting you guys know that. And I'm willing to answer any questions that you guys have. And my experience here has been good and bad. I have gotten a lot of the treatment that I've needed, but being an older resident and some of the residents here are 20 and they're DOC, we don't really have a lot of job opportunities. We did have the cafe, but because of COVID, a lot of us aren't working and we are finished with high school, so we're kind of just sitting here. But I am enrolled in Bellevue College and I start my classes next month. But I do think that this facility needs more college education for older girls because there's going to be a lot of older girls and DOC boys here. So that's something that I'd like to talk about. And besides that, I think the staff here is great and the treatment is great. We just need more education opportunities and more work opportunities. And that's pretty much it.
So Summer, I know you said you'd be open for questions, and do you want to, is there anybody else who has questions for Summer? It sounds like she's open to them, so I want to respect what she has offered, and if anybody has any questions for her, there's a couple more minutes that she has left in the time for her, so if you want to ask any, this would be a great opportunity.
Sure. Hi, Summer. Thanks so much for joining us today. Wanted to ask if you did have your choice of what other kind of training or education you would have, what would you like to see offered?
For, you said training for education or for like jobs?
Both, either.
Well, for education, I have it right now, like I have opportunities for college education, but for training programs, I personally would like more like maybe things that are for women that women like skincare, and like I've always been into mechanics, so maybe something like a mechanic class. And because I guess there used to be a wood shop here, but that's just something that's interesting to me. And honestly, a fitness program would be really nice because I'm really into fitness and I work out all the time. But when I was in juvie before this, Alder, there wasn't a lot of staff and we weren't able to rec like at all. So coming here, it was really cool for me to be able to exercise and actually rec. But I think that an organized program where certain units can do this and exercise and do activities and stuff like that, and it be more on a regular basis would be cool. We used to have these youth, what were those people called? Those gym people? U-Power. There used to be this group that came U-Power and they would do exercises with us and activities. And I think that's really important here because we do rec, but I think we should just have more like just structured programs that are more fun for us and like the stuff that we actually want to do. And so yeah, maybe some exercising programs and some basic life, what's it called? Life. There's like a class on it where you just do like just basic life training, like just stuff that you're gonna need when you get out. Because I feel like being here, I've received a lot of treatment, but I haven't learned like a lot of stuff that I'm gonna need to know when I actually get out. So yeah, maybe just a program to like actually prepare us for the real world and walk us through like how to present our charges when we get interviews and stuff. Like I personally am really worried about, you know, getting interviews when I get out. Like I don't know what to say, I don't know how to explain myself. And so I think maybe something like that to prepare us more when we get out would be good, like groups and stuff. And one more thing, definitely, I think it would be nice for this place to have NA and AA meetings, because there's a girl here that I know that was sent here for drug and alcohol treatment and she has not got it at all due to COVID. And so it's kind of upsetting when kids get sent here for drug and alcohol treatment, especially younger kids, and they don't get real treatment. It's basically just watching videos and learning about drugs, which is, you know, good, but we need a solid like treatment here for kids that have drug and alcohol issues, because it's just not working. And I've seen kids here that haven't got any treatment for it at all. And it's sad. Being in a place like this, it's really important that the younger kids especially get the help that they need, because a lot of people here don't have family or support on the outs, and they need to get it here so that maybe they can get some knowledge about it and get help when they get out.
Thank you, Summer.
Thank you, Summer. That was great to hear your perspectives on what is going on at Echo Glen for you. So why don't we go ahead and go to Billy at Twin Rivers.
Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me? All right. So my name's Billy. I'm 19 years old. I'm from Sunnyside. I've been in JR for almost 5 years now. You know, being in JR for as many years as I've been, you know, it's I went there when I was young. I ended up at Green Hill when I was 15 years old. When I first got there, you know, I really wasn't motivated to, you know, change and do the things I need to do to grow up. But I realized, you know, this is my opportunity to grow up. You know, I put my head down in school. I graduated. I took advantage of all the opportunities they had to offer. I received several certificates, took all the programs, and ended up, I think it was 2017 or 18, I went and spoke at legislature to get this bill passed that allowed us to stay here till we're 25. And it allowed me to go to a group home, which I wasn't expecting. You know, I was expecting to go to DOC when I was 21, get out when I'm 24. So I'm able to stay here at the group home, and, you know, I can get a job where I can save money to set me up for success when I get out. And I'm hoping to put a down payment on a house when I get out. So that's my major goal and priority when I get out, is to do that. And right now I'm working on building ties back with family. Haven't seen some of my family members in years, so it's kind of hard to do. There's no visitation right now. So yeah, but I'd like to talk about the job readiness and education. So right now we're able to get jobs, and the only limits to that are what county you can work in. So right now we can only work in Benton County. So we're able to work. We can go to college. Right now I applied for your Columbia Basin. I'm gonna probably take a 1-year program for my real estate license, and that's a career I want to pursue when I get out. And what worked for me in JR was having opportunities to be on committees, to speak and have my voice heard. Like I said, I went and spoke at the Capitol to help get these laws passed, and that really helped. Employment at Green Hill helped. Allowed me to save money for when, you know, I went to a group home, or if I did release, helped me set up for clothing that I wouldn't have had unless I had the job. So that helped. A thing I would change about JR would be the opportunity for youth to build credit at community facilities, because some youth now, they'll be getting out at, you know, an older age, you know, age between, you know, 20, 24 years old, and some maybe even 25, and they'll get out and have no credit. And with that comes, you know, high interest rates, or not even an opportunity to put a down payment on a car or a house. So that's something I would like to work on. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Billy.
Yeah.
We also heard, just before we go to Deontay, that Sergio has also said he's open for questions. So at the end, for we can open up to questions, so that for those youth who are comfortable with asking them in the moment, then we'd be happy to do that. So we'll move to Deontay now, and then there's an opportunity for questions at the end too. So thank you, Sergio, for sending that in, and we'll do that at the end after Deontay. Okay, Deontay, on to you.
Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Am I good? I don't even know. All right, cool. All right, good morning. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you guys for this opportunity. I really appreciate you guys trying to help us to get real second chances out. I really appreciate it. Okay, so, but again, my name is Deontay. I'm 20 years old. I was 15, turning 16 when I first caught my case. I was sent to Alder Juvenile Detention Center for about a week. And I got sent to Kent Regional Justice Center for about a year and a half, where I was tried as an adult and got sentenced to 63 months and three years of.
They're probably asking questions, Martin.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought somebody would say something to me. But after I got sentenced, they sent me to Green Hill when I was 17. And when I arrived at Green Hill, I only had 0.5 credits. So when I got there, I hit the floor and started running. I went through ART twice. I went through SMART. I was a mentor to the mental health unit. I was in multiple culture groups. I was in youth council. I worked in the kitchen. I was in college class. But really what I'm most proud of is my high school diploma, because if I didn't get my Compton, he's the, I don't know if you guys know of him, but he's like the group home coordinator. So he gave me an ultimatum and said, if I don't graduate by this time, then you're gonna have to wait for the next year for me to go to a group home. So mind you, when I got there, I was 17 and I had 0.5 credits. So I'll go to class every day, ask the teachers if they have any extra work, and went through multiple packets, just got it done, and I was able to graduate on time actually. And since then, I got sent to Oak Ridge Community Facility, and while here, I had multiple jobs. I worked at Fastenal and was a lead worker there. Then they relocated to Lacey, so I had to find a new job, and then I found a job and landed in Milgard Windows and Doors for about a month and a half, but unfortunately because of the pandemic, I got laid off. So as of right now, I'm on unemployment, but for my reentry, I'm searching of apprenticeships that I'm about to get into, so I'm not really wasting any time. But while I'm at Oak Ridge, I went through the manufacturing program where I got my forklift, CPR first aid, my flaggers, my manufacturing 1 and 2, my lean, OSHA 10, and I earned 32 college credits. So that really helped me actually land those jobs because of those certifications. So the manufacturing program really helped me for my transition in group home. Speaking of transition, I'll get released soon in October. So right now, I'm currently working on getting my license and finding the right schooling for me in the right areas and things like that. And yeah, and sorry, I'm kind of everywhere right now. My head's kind of just spinning around. I don't even know if I'm on the right points. I apologize, but something that would really help us as youth or transitioning is record sealing. Record sealing, hold on, I got you. Record sealing for youth who committed their offense under the age of 18 but was tried as an adult. Second, jail parole aftercare for individuals like me who been through jail through the whole sentence and upon post-release have to go under DOC supervision. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I appreciate you guys for the opportunity, and I really hope I covered everything. Yeah.
You did great, Deontay.
All right, thank you.
You hit all the topic areas, and every single one of you, the young people who spoke, thank you. You did a fantastic job talking about exactly what you needed to be sharing and for the Oversight Board to be hearing. So thank you all. And we do have some time now for folks who want to ask questions. For any of the youth who want to be able to answer, we go right ahead. We can open up for questions and hear what folks have to say.
Billy, in particular, I just wanted to ask you briefly, you mentioned that it was hard to reconnect with your family during COVID, and I just wanted to know if there were opportunities that you think would be helpful to facilitate better family interactions during this time, and whether you're having the access to FaceTime or to Zoom or other programs that enough to continue those relationship building, or if there's anything else you can suggest.
Yeah, so actually there's eligibility for FaceTimes right now. But so my family doesn't have an iPhone, so I'm unable to do those. And if they don't have an iPhone, they'll try and set up a Zoom meeting. And, you know, some families don't have access to computers or stuff like that. So that's a barrier right there. But I did hear something on the radio actually not too long ago about state facilities allowing outdoor visitations. So that's something that, you know, I think could help, since we're going through COVID right now and we can't have possible visitation till phase 3 or 4. I think outdoor visitation, you know, could be a thing that could help.
This is Sharonda. Do you want the questions in the chat box, or are we just asking them directly?
Go ahead and ask them directly, because the chat box it's not open to everyone, so if you ask them out loud, I'll capture them.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Sharonda.
2 questions. The first question is that do you feel like, and this is for the staff, that the criminal backgrounds for the youth are barriers towards employment or certificates? And then my second question is do the youth feel supported in transitioning back into their communities?
And I'm going to ask the staff to wait for their portion of the meeting to answer that question, just so we make sure that we hear the youth voice during enough this time. So if you guys want to go ahead, the youth, and answer Sharonda's question about feeling supported.
Yeah, I feel supported here. I don't get out for another 9 more months, so transition hasn't really been a big topic for me right now. But I do feel supported from the staff, because there's a lot of staff here that I'm really close with and I know want the best for me and I know will help me get ready for when I need to leave. But like I said earlier, the only thing I do feel a little scared about is just transitioning and getting my record sealed and how that's going to look, because I don't think I can get it sealed for 5 years after I get out. So, but yeah, I feel supported by the staff.
Thank you.
Sergio's got a response to that, I think.
Yeah, I feel support. I'm not getting out for a while, but I have connections with community mentors on the outs. And so I feel like that wouldn't be a problem for me to be able to transition. And the staff here too, they're eager for me to, you know, leave and be successful, but they're also here for support also. So the support, yeah, is good here.
Yeah, here too at Oakers Community Facility, I get tons of support. Honestly, like they staff helped me open up my account for my release. I already got my car. Staff helped me purchase my car, and as of right now, staff is trying to reach out to see if I can get my license a little earlier, because the programs I'm trying to get into, I have to have my license. So for me to even like get a step foot into the door, I need to have my license, and that's in the works right now. And yeah, I got tons of support really, and through my jobs, the staff here, community activists, all sorts of support.
So good morning, and thank you guys for being here. My name is Lois Martin, and I wanted to ask a question about the transition piece. I know you mentioned it, and Summer, you said it'll be about 9 months before you transition, but thinking about like your friends that are in there and some that have left, when do you think, as you think about transition programs, what do you feel, how much time do you need? Do you think it should start 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? What do you think would be helpful for you?
I think 6 months would be helpful for me, only because by the time I get out, I'll have been locked up 3 years, and I feel like a lot of stuff is changing in the world, and I have never been convicted before of anything, so I'm not used to this. I don't really know like the next step to take and what to do. And I do have family. I have a lot of family and a lot of support, but I'm about to be 20 and I would like to not get out and just need my family for everything. So I think about 6 months would be perfect to look into jobs, look into programs I can get in, how to transition to my college classes, you know, where I'm going to be living, housing opportunities, stuff like that. So yeah, about 6 months would be nice, because I don't want it to be like, you know, I get out. I just feel like that's the perfect amount of time, because I have a lot of stuff I need to figure out. And now that I'm down to 9 months, I don't want to wait till the last minute to figure out what I'm going to do and the resources that I need. I want to be prepared, because it's really stressful thinking about getting out, because a lot of things are going to be different. So I would like to prepare way ahead of time and have everything set up for me.
Thank you for that, Summer. Anyone else?
Honestly, I blanked out. So can I get the question again? What was the question?
No problem at all. I just wanted to ask, when you think about transitioning out, how much time do you think? I'm not sure how much transition support you receive right now. So, and thinking about leaving, you know, how much time do you think you need to be able to have help with those, with the type of support that will help you prepare to be ready to be on your own?
Honestly, for me, I feel like as much time as possible, because when you're at a community facility, it's less, I'll say, it's like less institutional. So if you get released straight from the institution, you're gonna still have that institution mindset. So for you to get released from a group home, you're already in the community, you're already working or going to school or both, and you're working on yourself. So you get to see your community, you get to feel the community. So I feel like as much time as possible, if I answered your question correctly.
Well, I just want to thank you, Sergio, Billy, Summer, and Deontay, for sharing your experiences with us, taking the time, being vulnerable, answering questions, and being super honest about your experiences. I think there's a lot of action items, frankly, just from your comments here today. And so I think a couple of you mentioned you didn't know if you had answered the questions correctly or gave us anything. And I have to say, just your sharing your real experiences. Again, I have a list of items for us to follow up on. So thank you so much for joining us today, and for obviously keeping the institution safe. I see everybody masking up, and yourselves safe. And again, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, and we look forward to seeing you out in the community, if not before.
Thank you.
So we're going to now move on to hearing from staff directly as well. And so I think I'm going to turn it back to Rebecca, and do just want to remind you guys of the question that Shonda asked as well. Include that in any of your remarks about whether you think there are hindrances in with their records as they go out into the community. So I will turn it back to you, Rebecca.
Great, thanks. Frank's gonna kick us off, and then we'll take some turns here, the rest of our JR leadership team. So we'll pass it on to you, Frank.
Great, and I'll be really quick. I know we're a little bit behind, and we really want to hear from other staff members, so I'll be as quick as I can. Sharonda, just real quick, One of the areas where we do see a problem is for the youth who may graduate from certain schools. It's on their, it's on their transcript what school they came from, and if it says Green Hill School and that kind of thing, it can be a marker. So that's something that we are talking with the school districts about. So there are some instances where that is indeed a barrier. Just real quick, you're gonna hear a lot about our current state of things for the agency and the work in JR, both related to COVID, and you'll hear some future-looking stuff from Allison Krutzinger later this afternoon in terms of things we will be pursuing in the upcoming legislative session, and a few of them in particular around increasing our ability to move youth into community facilities. You just heard the value from the youth about being in those community facilities, their access to training, school, and really helping prepare for that transition. We have a significant number of our youth who are currently eligible and qualified to be in community facilities, and we just don't have the footprint to move them from our secure facilities out. And so you're going to hear a little bit about that, but that's certainly a big part of our strategy going forward. We've had to make a number of decisions in the COVID space that have been driven by our thin staffing. We were not necessarily adequately staffed before COVID to do the work we were charged with. You all are aware of that. The legislature's been helping us correct that. But the reality is we have such a thin staffing situation that we've really had to do a lot of work to ensure staff safety, which has ultimately limited visitation, as you heard here today, with students and their families. And so that's just an area of, you're going to hear more detail about it, but it's been a wrenching set of decisions there where we've really had to put staff safety as primary because we don't have the ability to replace them if any of our critical staff in these facilities. With that, we are really excited about this conversation today. Overall, I'm just going to be real brief about our strategies here, which is one, we're going to be partnering with community organizations, the AG's office, legislators, and others on prevention and diversion options to keep more youth from coming to us, to try to address the issues of disproportionality in the criminal justice system upstream of our agency. For those youth that come to us, you'll be hearing from Allison later about a couple of treatments. You heard earlier from Summer about the inability to get certain treatments. We do have a problem with getting in particular drug and alcohol treatments, all the youth that need it. You're going to be hearing about that. So we want to do a better job with the youth that we have, both in education and in treatment. And there's an institutional education task force going on as we speak that hopefully will be coming up with some recommendations on the educational component of our work, or it's really our partnership with the public schools. And then you've heard a lot about transitions today. This is an area where our agency needs to grow additional muscle, and not just for kids from JR, but kids who are transitioning out of foster care, as well as just at-risk youth that may not be in foster care or in JR. We want to develop a community of practice and some muscle around just the science and the necessary elements of successful transition. And so you should ask a lot of questions in that area, because that's an area where we do some good work, but then there's areas where I think we can be doing better. You'll hear a little bit about that. But I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it back over to Rebecca to see if we can't try to get back on schedule. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. Has everybody seen the PowerPoint?
Yes, but the view, you might want to change the view so we see just one slide at a time. We can see your whole.
Okay. Thank you. That's good to, it's good to see. Well, and I've not done this before, so I'm not quite sure how this works. I'm just going to close it for now because I'm afraid I'm going to try to do too many things here and not be able to really speak to everything we're trying to do. I can pull it back up. Let's see. Sorry.
Rebecca, we can also, if it helps, we can as staff pull up your slides and
that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
That's a little bit more technologically advanced for me apparently than than what I thought I could manage. So thank you very much.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, so I was be starting on slide 3 about the guiding principles, and just to remind everybody, we are going to be Kathleen Harvey Prez, and I are all going to just be speaking in some broad brush terms about the statewide perspective on the topics that the Oversight Board had asked to hear about. And then we're going to turn it over to Jennifer Redmond, Superintendent at Green Hill School, and Yolanda Lee, who's the community facility administrator at Oak Ridge, where Deontay is, and just talk a little bit more so they can have some more time to actually share about what's happening on the ground on a daily basis. So this slide just is a reminder that grounds us all in our principles. And the picture, I think, speaks just so much about the role of youth in influencing policy and systemic change. These are the young people. Billy talked about his role in helping to pass House Bill 1646, and this is the signing of that bill. So just a great reminder of that real crucial role that youth voice plays in advancing our system. Okay, go to the next slide. Thank you. So again, you've heard already from some of the youth already speaking about the impact of COVID. COVID is front and center for us. The health and safety of our staff and our youth is paramount. We are definitely impacted by shortages of staffing, both from staff being out due to impacts from their own exposure or symptoms. And then we have had a few cases of positive staff and then some positive youth. We've done really well overall. We had very few initially of cases, and then we've had some more recently as the communities themselves have opened up, and we've had increased staff exposure in the community that has definitely impacted both our institutions and our community facilities. We are mitigating that risk by doing symptom screening actively for everybody who comes in, all of our staff, any contractors who have to come in, and obviously promoting social distancing, using universal masking. Those are things that are super paramount for us. We are doing reentry planning through a COVID-19 lens, and this is actually a good segue to the next slide, which really speaks to the fact that reentry planning, solid reentry planning is a priority for us. Pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's a huge emphasis of ours. And now with COVID, we have that lens of how are families doing around housing? How are they doing with medical? We have young people who are returning to homes with high-risk individuals. We have young people who contribute economically towards their families, who they might be helping with childcare or with teaching young kids in the family who are doing remote schooling. So we are talking about what those needs are. We're talking about how do we help to plan? How do we help the family plan and support the young person and their family in that transition back into the community. And also that linkage with the community-based organizations is so critical. There's an example on the slide about our housing authorities and our relationship with them. This is a new opportunity that we have through DCYF with a child welfare organization in the past that had MOUs with the housing authorities and to help with housing options for young people and their families involved in the child welfare system. And this is an example of how we're trying to link with that and expand those opportunities for young people who would be transitioning out of JR. So that's a burgeoning opportunity that's coming up. And the last thing I want to say regarding reentry planning is the maintaining connections. You've heard that throughout the young people and what they were sharing earlier about the need for maintaining connections with their family, with their friends, with their loved ones. And we have enacted remote visitation since March. You've heard that we've had technical challenges. There's real issues that exist. And with the staffing challenges that we have and shortages with coverage, there are definitely issues that we have with trying to make sure that we're doing this well, and we're addressing them. We're continually working on enhancing that access. We have, for example, 139 new Zoom licenses for staff across JR that just got issued this week. We've implemented or put up new WebEx boards, which are like the big giant screens that maybe even Deontay was using when he was there at Oak Ridge, to be able to do conference calls, Zoom calls with family, with organizations like this. So it's expanding that access. We're continually looking for ways to expand both the technology, the bandwidth, the staffing that we need, trying to get really creative in how we enhance that connection, because we know how critical it is. The last thing I want to say about that is Billy brought up what the long-term care facilities are doing. You might have all heard about this in the news. He heard about it too. And we are looking at the model that they've been approved to move forward with the remote visitation, or with the actually physical visitation with families. So we're evaluating that as well for how we might be able to do something like that within JR. I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen now, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Okay, next slide. Hello, everybody. Off the heels of what Rebecca was talking about around reentry, we wanted to give you some just basic data around the JR release data. And as you can see, in 2018, we had almost 100 youth. This is a snapshot in time, but when you see it, it's pretty consistent in terms of the total number of youth that are releasing on average per month. In 2019 and 20, it was roughly the same, about 26 youth releasing each month. And then at the community facilities, very similar in terms of about 36 youth releasing. Next slide. So when we were talking about transitions in pre-2016, we did transitions very differently. We had an entire length of a young person's stay, and we based transition planning towards the end of a young person's sentence. It only included JR staff in the transition planning, and we only completed it about 50% of the time. So what we did was we took a look. We actually had the Council of State Governments come in and provide us some consultation. There was a lot of formal spotlight on reentry nationally, and we started doing surveys with families, with youth. We created a committee to really redesign how we do and how we prioritize reentry. And like what Frank mentioned, we definitely have a lot more work in the future, but to really be focused and centered on young people and their families being a part of the process, that they actually drive reentry. We do implement a reentry team meeting that is facilitated by a trained facilitator. The youth and the families have to be part of the process. So they participate either in person or through Zoom or through the phone. We do identify, young people identify the areas of, that are essential, which Rebecca referenced, you know, where are they gonna live? What school are they going to attend? Are they going to be involved in employment? One of the key factors is that we don't just plan for their stay. We are really looking at planning for their return when they first arrive. So this reentry team meeting is actually done within the first 30 days that a young person actually comes to JR. We are trying to engage families or natural supports along the way. As you can see, the completion rate is right now is around 82% for those initial reentry team meetings. And then within the last 60 days, there is another formal reentry team meeting, but these reentry team meetings can be done at any point in a young person's stay. And we really, again, want young people to be the drivers around a reentry plan, because we know that if they are not a part of it, most likely it's not their plan, it's our plan. And so in the future, we do have natural supports or community representatives or advocates that participate, but what we don't want to do is inundate the youth and the family and having all the professionals in the room and then their voice is not heard. In the future, how do we enhance the reentry team meeting process? And also, how do we make sure that we are targeting and trying to ensure that every single young person walks out with a reentry plan in hand? Next slide. I think Harvey's going to kick it off for the JR to 25.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. Good morning, everyone. And on this slide, we wanted to provide you some basic information in regards to our young people who are impacted by this legislation, both 1646 and 6160. And please note that it's a snapshot of August 3rd, 2020. And so we wanted to highlight those individuals who are in our care at that moment in time. And then the graph itself talks about the client demographics and sentencing type. What I want to spend a minute or two on is to drill down a little bit more around the adult sentence use, those 81, and just to highlight that there's really three categories there. So there are those who are new intakes that are now direct placements into JR who would have previously gone to DLC. So we're getting new intakes. Then we have some young people who were already in our care who now can continue to go beyond the age of 21. And then we had a third component to 1646, which was a retroactive, which we're referring to as the DLC transfers. And so I wanted to quickly highlight where we are with those DLC transfers. And so that process was intended to be initiated and implemented in early spring, right after the budget session in March. And so we were going to initiate transfers there when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And so we had to suspend our plan to transfers at that time on the onset of COVID-19, so we could, like everyone else, get put protocols in place in order to be able to address and adhere to universal protocols. So those DLC transfers, actually, we were able to initiate them starting in June, and we had two eligible young ladies who were eligible for transfers, and that occurred in June, and they got transferred to Echo Glen. Meanwhile, and in July, we began to transfer the males into Green Hill School. And at this point, we have 11 transfers, and we're doing a phased approach that will occur through the end of September. And we anticipate 35 young men transferring over to Green Hill School. And so we would have a total of 35 males and 2 females associated with the transfers. And part of the rationale for a phasing is also having the COVID lens. So we have to ensure that we're doing it in a phased approach in order to be mindful of if we need to quarantine any individuals. We know there were some facilities at DLC who had positive COVID cases, and so we have to be mindful of that. And so we need a transition phase and a time in case we have to quarantine. And so that's been part of our plan. But things are moving forward, and we will continue to the transfers through the end of September. And so we can move on to slide 9, and I can talk more around the programming. And so there are 4 bullets there, but I really wanted to focus quickly around post-secondary expansion. And so one of the things that we recognize is not one size fits all. And so regarding creating multiple education pathways, we focused on 3 guided pathways for our young adults. And so one is around apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship training programs. And I think it was Sergio who referenced we have a new construction trades program that is operating at Green Hill School. So that is one option for our young men to consider, and as far as an option for education. Another item or another pathway is around career and technical, and that's partnering with our community and technical colleges. And so an option there that we've already partnered and has been ongoing for a few years is around the Manufacturing Academy. So that's a second pathway that our young people can consider for education. And then the third is academic. And so we also want to provide pathways that could lead to a bachelor's degree. And so we would create that pathway. So the intent here, again, is to give our young people options. And I think it was alluded to that they're also doing career exploration. And I think that will sort of help drive them into which path that they want. The last piece I'll cover is around the community facilities transition review. So those individuals who fall under 1646, there will be some who will be eligible for community, the step down to a community facility. And so that team is looking at those that will be eligible, and those will be individuals whose sentence ends prior to the age of 25. And so that work is beginning as we've transferred these individuals over. So with that, I will be turning it over to the superintendent of Green Hill School, Jennifer Redmond, and Yolanda Lee, who is the CEF administrator for Touchstone, and they can talk a little bit more in detail about what that looks like at each of their facilities. So Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Harvey. Hopefully you can hear me okay through my mask. Can you hear me? I'll make sure.
Did I?
You're cutting.
We can hear you just fine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll try not to repeat too much of what Harvey and Kathleen and Rebecca indicated kind of on a higher level. My intent hopefully is just to provide more of kind of the operational aspects as far as implementing some of these programs, as well as some of the barriers we're facing as a result of the pandemic. So specific to the new legislation with Jared at 25, I want to start out just by thanking anybody on this call today, on the board, what have you, who was a part of that and advocating for these bills. We have seen firsthand now that we're receiving some of those individuals from the Department of Corrections, and even those coming as direct commits. They've been amazing additions to our campus. I'd be lying to say that staff weren't nervous receiving individuals transferred from DOC. You know, there was the concern of we don't want Green Hill to become a part of DOC, and that has absolutely not occurred. With the small group that we've received so far, they've been very much a part of program planning on campus and informing kind of some of the additional things that we want to add in. They've been assimilating wonderfully with the rest of the young people on our campus. Some of them have been serving as almost stabilizing factors and mentors. They come with a level of maturity, and it's been really nice to see on the campus, and very much put some of staff's concerns at ease, because it's a new population for us. And so I just want to highlight that. Some of the things that we were hoping to have in place right now, which unfortunately are not on a full scale, were some of the college coursework. So right before COVID had happened, we had entered into an agreement with Centralia Community College, and that's a new partnership. They're our next door neighbor, and they haven't had a sustainable presence on our campus. So we're fortunate enough to say that they're very excited about the partnership. We've entered into an agreement. Unfortunately, kicking it off has been difficult because of COVID. So those instructors are not coming on our campus right now. There's a level of distance learning occurring. We've been having to get through network connection barriers and things like that. But for the most part, there's been a small scale version of Centralia Community College distance learning presence on our campus. Our hope as things move on, we're going to be able to expand that. They would like to do work with our welding and auto shop program, so that can also be a college certification pathway as well. And it's not just something that's provided through our K-12 program. The new program, pre-apprenticeship program, continues. We've had to make modifications to that as well. One thing that's COVID related on our campus operationally is we have to treat every living unit on our campus as an individual household. So what we're really doing is trying not to mix young people from unit to unit, so that if in the event there is an outbreak or a positive case, we can do better containment and tracing. So as a result, it's reduced the number of young people that can be in a classroom setting at any one time, as well as a particular vocational program. Obviously, masks and social distancing and heavy sanitation takes additional time as well. So some of those things are happening. they're just a small scale, and we're just not able to reach as many young people as we had originally planned. And we look forward, when this is all done, we'll be ready to go. Additional things that we're looking into is just exploring partnerships with other businesses for increasing other vocational training opportunities that can help support local businesses. So we saw some good models of this in Oregon Youth Authority that we don't necessarily want to replicate, but maybe look and adapt to what makes sense for our program here at Green Hill School. And it provides them another opportunity to earn money that can go towards restitution, transition planning, and things like that upon release. Sergio talked about a lot of the vocational opportunities that we have on campus. Those have had to be reduced a little bit as well, largely because of the having to reduce a mixing of young people on campus. We're not eating in the central kitchen, so a lot of our central kitchen jobs have been reduced. All meals are happening in unit. So that's been an impact as well. I think that some of the things that are worrisome for us with the pandemic is, what is school going to look like in the fall? So similar to what's happening out in the communities, with most districts or all districts doing mainly an online platform of sort. We've been pretty blessed with the Chehalis School District as far as our spring and summer school program. There was still a level of presence on campus by the instructors, and we feel very fortunate for that. Now going into the fall, what we don't know is when the district has already indicated that they'd be online only, and if that's going to impact us, and that would bleed over into institution education. Obviously, we're a unique environment. We hope that there's exceptions provided because obviously we don't look like public schools. But if the decision were to be made by the district to not allow teachers on campus to do in-person learning, that's going to be a significant impact to us. Our young people aren't online, so the distance learning isn't similar to what happens out in the community. So it would be a lot of packet work and things like that, and that's concerning to me. Decision hasn't been made yet, but it's forthcoming. And I think lastly, I would just add, I was asked to speak about what support do we need during this time. For me, and I speak on behalf of my staff, it's just people truly understanding and empathizing with a 24/7 environment charged for caring with a unique and vulnerable population. Our goal right now is just to maintain a healthy level of programming and enrichment activities, whatever that looks like, you know, even with our downsizing of vocational programs and education, but also maintaining compliance and providing a safe environment for the young people and staff. Our staff aren't teleworking. Our staff come to work every day and try to keep staffing levels at a healthy level so that we can provide those programming and enrichment opportunities for the young people here. And it's scary. It's scary for staff. It's scary for the young people. So I think it's just a level of empathy and understanding and grace. We're not going to do everything 100% perfect, but I can tell you every day people are trying really hard. That's all I have. I'm available for any additional questions after Yolanda speaks. Thank you very much.
And I should have said this before, we are
I'm on
close
mute.
to time, so if we can wrap it up after Yolanda, that'd be great. Thanks.
Perfect, and I will go fast. So if Billy is still on the line, I just want to say, hi, Billy, it's good to see you. And if not, I'll talk to him later. Anyway, I'm Yolanda Lee. I am the administrator at Oak Ridge Community Facility, one of the 8 facilities here in the state of Washington that is ran by JR. Oak Ridge is unique in that our program is dedicated to the Manufacturing Academy. So every 6 months, we get 12 brand new young people who are coming in to go through 3 months of classroom training through Bates Technical College and 3 months of apprenticeship out with our community partners. Before COVID, our guys were going to class at Bates for 8 hours, 3 to 4 days a week. But when COVID hit in March, we had to do some kind of work to figure out how can we make this happen. And in a time when Bates School had to close and kind of come back and figure out how they were going to survive during the pandemic. So what we decided was we would do class in the classroom, and where Deontay was actually sitting at is in our classroom. And so also what that meant was that some of the case managers would have to do some tutoring in math and science and aerospace and all of those things. And the great thing for me as an administrator is that, you know, the staff didn't complain about it. They did some Google searches on how to keep up with the math assignments. And the kids, the guys didn't do very much complaining either. They kind of understood that it was about everybody being healthy and safe. And so that happened for about a month and a half, 2 months, until we got our Ajax partner approved to come back in and work with the guys. And so then he started doing the classroom training. And the last 2 weeks of the classroom portion, they were able to actually go up to Bates Technical College and actually work on some machinery, do some projects. A couple of projects that they did, a young person did a coat rack, a young person did a shoe rack. It was very interesting, to say the least. There was a couple of canes in there. So I kind of wrote down some of the questions that have been asked, and I want to kind of address the questions through the lens of community facility. So when does transition start? Transition starts from the moment that a kid walks through the door of JR. So transition starts for a kid that I'm getting from Green Hill School. That transition should have already started. What we're doing as they come to us is we're picking up that ball, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, so what happens now? Is this kid gonna be here for only 6 months and then released to parole? Is this kid gonna be here for 6 months, released to his family? Is this kid gonna be be here 6 months and released to homelessness? Those are things we're looking at. Like, so I have a new cohort coming in at the end of September. We've already started looking at those things and who we need to connect with. The connection to the communities, absolutely. For me, we can't do this work alone. Like, we can't want and desire the success for our kids by ourselves within JRA. So I rely on my partners. I rely on Ajax partnerships. I rely on Rashid Norris, who comes out and does independent living for our guys. I rely on Pat Mound that comes out to do independent living skills weekly with our guys. I rely on our employers to kind of keep our young men motivated and wanting to not come back here. I don't want them to come back here. And what I tell them is, this is only a moment in time in your life. And you're not gonna have yo out on the street saying you can't do that. You're not gonna have your case manager on the street saying you can't do that. So we wanna teach you and motivate you to kind of be that person that does it for yourself. Another question was the barriers to employment. Absolutely. However, as kind of laws have changed and communities and the state has become more knowledgeable about what is needed for our persons that are incarcerated, it's a little bit easier depending on the job. So like, in a lot of our manufacturing jobs, it's easier for people with a criminal offense to get employment. For some of our office-based jobs, our social service type jobs, it's a little bit harder due to the background check process. So the answer to the barriers to employment is a yes and no. And so one of the things that we look at is we look at kind of what is realistic. So as Deontay was talking, he was talking about one of his goals is to enroll in an apprenticeship program. So that is our goal. That's what we're doing. He's out in October, figuring out FAFSA work for him. He talked about having a car, right? So we got on board with mom. Mom was in partnership because he can't sign a contract. So mom met us up at the car dealership, gave her the check. She bought the car. The car is in her name right now until he releases. Now we're working on him getting a driver's license, getting insurance, getting all of those things so that he can be prepared to go. And I also wanted Billy. So Billy was in the manufacturing academy for the first 3 months and for the classroom portion. And when he got here, he said, yo, my family is in Eastern Washington. I really would like to be close to my family. So I said, okay, let me figure out what I can do. So I sent some emails, talked to some people. And so it was like, okay, so once Billy gets through the classroom portion of training, we will transition him over to Twin Rivers and partner with Twin Rivers to make sure that he gets some form of apprenticeship. So when we talk about like those connections, when we talk about transition, we're always thinking about that. And for me, I'm fortunate enough to have a staff team that can kind of think as fast as I think, because they know I have like 15 things going on in an hour. And so they are jumping on board to make sure that they put Deontay on the computer so that he can fill out his FAFSA work. They take, Deontay to whatever licensing place so that he can get his driver's license. So blah, 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 blah. I think I fit all the questions in. Does anybody have any questions?
That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate that. I think we have a couple minutes for questions because we got started a little bit late on this section. So maybe 1 or 2 questions at the most. I know that I have one, and I will ask a quick question of, one of you mentioned that the students aren't online, and I'm wondering why that is.
So this is Yolanda. I will answer that. So right now, actually currently, we do have laptops for students. About 3 months ago, we got 16 laptops for each of our students to have. Right now, we are working to try to get JR's IT on board to actually oversee it. Because what was happening was an outside resource was actually overseeing the laptops. And it became quite difficult to get guys online, and it was a mess. However, we're working through it. I now have 4 kids that are actually attending school through the Clover Park School District through online work. And so they've been able to actually get on and get some work done. So we are figuring that out at the community facility level.
And I'll speak to Green Hills School. We have young people through the Chehalis School District, when they're using school computers, have a level of secured online access, and that's when school is in session. So those aren't state computers. We do have secured laptops, and I think these are the same ones that Yolanda's speaking about that we received, and we are still in the process of implementing those, and they are uploaded with a significant amount of educational resources, and those are not connected to online. They get docked, and information gets uploaded or downloaded. We are trying to find that balance of providing a secured network for young people to be able to access the things that they should be accessing and not the things that they should not be accessing. So we're not there yet. Part of it is just an infrastructure framework. So getting Wi-Fi dropped into certain areas, especially at Green Hill, we have a lot of brick and mortar. So it's not easy to do. We're in the process of doing that. And then once that gets done, then it's figuring out, okay, so what does the access look like so that we can ensure it's done in a safe way.
I'd like to ask, this is Bobby Bridge, I'd like to ask what the incidence of infection of COVID has been throughout JR, both staff and young people.
You know, it's been, for the young people, it's been hard simply because like there's not a lot of things that we normally would do that we can do anymore. Like the family engagement part has been really hard on the guys. So we're making sure that, you know, whatever avenues the family has, whether it's just by phone, whether it's Zoom, whether it's WebEx, whether it's FaceTime, that our young people are getting the opportunity to do that. At the beginning of the pandemic, before we were kind of more isolated, we would allow families, like if they wanted to drop snacks off for their young people, we would meet them across the street at Albertson, we take the kid over. So initially it was, okay, so you can't have contact, don't contact. But then what was happening was mom and dad wanted to hug, the kids wanted to hug, the girlfriends wanted to give a kiss, so we had to stop that. So now, you know, the families can drop stuff off, but now staff goes and gets it and brings it back.
Okay, but my question relates to what the numbers are. Do we know how many infections of staff as well as young people throughout JR?
Rebecca, Justice Bridge, I thought that's what you were asking too. The rate, I think we can get you specific numbers because I don't have them front and center, but I think we maybe have, and I can say roughly, there's I think about 8 to 10 youth total across all of our facilities. and I think maybe about a similar number of staff with COVID positive. It might actually be lower with the staff, but we've had other ones with like symptoms or possible exposure who have had to quarantine, so that number is much higher. But that's just rough numbers. We can certainly provide you with the actual numbers.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll follow up with that. And I know that Rebecca, you mentioned that you have a lot of great content in the PowerPoint that we were not able to get to today.
Yes.
And so I know you'll make that available to the board. So I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna, if staff is able to join us and remain, feel free, and maybe towards the end we'll have a little bit more time for questions before we go to public comment. But I do want to now make sure that we turn it over to Gordon McHenry, who's from the Washington Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice. And again, thanks so much to the staff who've joined us today and taking your time out from your busy schedules of other work, or real work. And I want to welcome Gordon McHenry.
Thank you. I'm sort of toggling back and forth. Can you all hear me okay?
Sure can.
Great, thanks. It's
and we
good to be with all.
As well.
Oh, good, great. It's good to be with all of you, and I appreciate this. I think this will be on behalf of the Partnership Council on Juvenile Justice, that is. And I think this is the first time, I'm pretty confident this is the first time that we're in an active conversation with you, and I hope it's not the last. I think there's some opportunities for us to stay connected in a way that benefits the youth that we're concerned about. So I am Gordon McHenry Jr. I have the honor of serving as the council chair. I've been chair since 2016. When I joined the council, I was the president and CEO of Solid Ground in King County, a community action anti-poverty agency. And then about 10 months ago, I left Solid Ground and joined United Way of King County as president and CEO. And many of you I know, and some of you I don't. I'm a longtime King County resident, born and raised, and happy to have the opportunity to be of service. I'll try to go very quick because I have a sense that you are a little bit behind schedule. The Partnership Council was created by Governor's Executive Order 1503 in response to federal provisions of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. And there are certain core aspects of that. So formation of a state advisory group, sometimes known as a SAG, S-A-G, state advisory group that serves as a point of analysis, planning, and advocacy for youth who are involved in or at risk of involvement in the juvenile justice system. We set priorities for the granting of federal juvenile delinquency and prevention funds that flow into the state and then flow locally, provided we comply with the requirements of the JJDPA. And then we fulfill the core requirements of that act, that federal act, which are deinstitutionalization of status offenders, separation of juveniles from adults in secure facilities, removal of juveniles from adult facilities and lockups, and addressing racial and ethnic disparities within the juvenile justice system. As you can see on the chart, I think what's really elegant and very appropriate is that it's a large council and it's cross-sector. All members are appointed by the governor. We represent, I think, most of the stakeholders who are involved in the juvenile justice system. So it includes legislators, prosecutors, educators, the juvenile rehabilitation administrator, juvenile court judges and administrator, law enforcement, public defender, service providers, researchers, and most importantly, youth with lived experience. And we can come back to that if we have time. So basically, the council has a broad array of expertise and knowledge in behavioral health, diversions, detention programs, reentry, policy reforms, and community-based solutions to delinquency prevention. By law, the majority of the council members are non-governmental. They're not employed by a government. 5 of the council members are youth under the age of 25 with lived experience in the juvenile justice system. And we have, in the last several years, made sure we have active participation rather, on the council from those who are in our secure facilities inside the state. I do want to take a moment to.
So sorry, Gordon, I just wanted to make sure that you know you have about 10 minutes.
Oh, great.
Here.
Great, gotcha. Okay, good. Just want to acknowledge folks in the room, Senator Jeannie Darnielle, Annie Lee, Judge Frank Cuthbertson, and Justice Bobby Bridge have all been very active either through the Partnership Council or through some of the task force. And Senator Darnielle serves on the Partnership Council at this moment as one of the 2 members from the legislature. We get support from Frank Ordway and the Office of Juvenile Justice, which is led by Alice Coyle. Let's see, we'll go to the next slide, I think. What guides us is equity and fairness, prevention. So we want to work upstream, and we want to work on system changes that reduce the number of youth who are impacted or involved in the juvenile justice system. We see and treat our youth, our young people, as possibilities, not as problems. And like I indicated, for the past 3 years, we've been very intentional about lifting up the youth voice so that our work is centered in the lived experiences of our youth. We'll go quickly to the core committees, Racial and Ethnic Disparities Committee, the Behavioral Health Committee, and the Reentry Committee. These are all standing committees, and they help support and ensure some projects and some initiatives under each of those. And I don't think we have time for that today, but they're all rooted in reducing racial and ethnic disparities, community and systems collaborations, and increasing the system to be centered in youth and family. I think the question and the associated with the invitation was, how can we collaborate? I think we want to collaborate. We could, if you want, to collaborate with you all on strategies to support our vulnerable youth and families. We want to make juvenile justice involvement rare. We want to make it fair and beneficial. And we've talked a lot at the council that there are things underway, and I think I heard some of them this morning, that have been implemented because of COVID. And we look at this as an opportunity to not see these as crisis response, but to actually raise the floor of our juvenile justice system, and to use that raised floor now and into the future as the basis on which we continue the reform efforts that are needed, not to go back necessarily to pre-COVID. So accelerate things that that have been talked about, and lock in adjustments that have been made because of COVID, if they are centered in race and ethnic disparity reduction, youth and family lived experience, and diversion and community solutions. So I'll stop there to see if there's any pressing questions, and then we can push more information out to you. I think there could be a benefit in us meeting with you at least once a year, just to update you on our work, and for us to hear what your concerns are or your goals with regard to an effective and reform-focused juvenile rehabilitation and JR systems.
Wonderful. Gordon, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we maybe have time for one very quick question. If any of the board members have a question for Gordon or for staff from JR facilities.
Well, I know how challenging Teams meetings are, so I'm glad I didn't put anybody to sleep.
Hi, Gordon. This is Ruth Kagi.
Hello, Ruth. Good to see you.
I noticed you have a behavioral health committee, and one of the issues that was raised by one of the youth who testified was the absence of treatment. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if the council has been engaged in discussion about increasing treatment options for youth in facilities.
Yes, we have, and we do hear that from our youth. And I think we hear it at every meeting. I know that there's, we have a project, CBITS, Cognitive Behavioral Intervention for Trauma in Schools. And I think that's that's underway. I think it was piloted, my recollection was at Echo Glen, and we had some good results, and they're using that to say, can we take that and expand that or replicate that? Dr. Eric Truppen, if many of you know him, he's one of the co-chairs of our Behavioral Health Committee, and he's quite fierce in his advocacy and his innovativeness. So yeah, we're working on that, and we do see that as a high priority, a need that needs to be addressed. Did that answer your question, Ruth?
Yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and if there's some Representative Sin, if there's some information that we need to hear coming out of this meeting or in future, please send that directly to me, or you can send it to Alice Coyle, who staffs us, and we'll make sure that we share that with the full council. We meet on a quarterly basis as a full council, and the executive committee meets once a month. So we have the ability to hear information and respond to it.
Great. Well, and I would just love to make the plug that because this is recorded and available, I think it would be amazing for your board to hear the direct remarks from Summer and Billy and Sergio and Deontay. So if you have a chance to share their voices with your board, I think that would be super valuable.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that offer. We will accept that.
Absolutely. Great. So we now are going to move to public comment. I do, again, just want to thank everybody from the institutions across the state who have joined us today. And again, a special shout out to Summer and Billy and Sergio and Deontay, who have shared their personal experiences with us and participating today, and to all the JR staff who has taken time out of your busy schedules to be here today. So with that, we will move to public comment, and I will turn it over to Nicholas.
Thank you. So first up for public comment, we have Jill Malott, and I apologize if I said that last name wrong.
That's okay. It happens all the time. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. My name is Jill Malott. I work with the Office of Civil Legal Aid. I am the Children's Representation Program Manager. And I just wanted to give some information about a situation at Morningstar Boys Home in Spokane. I received this information from one of my attorneys that I contract with, that my office contracts with. And my attorney, I believe, was infected with COVID from an in-person visit at Morningstar Boys Home. And I think probably many of you are aware that there was an outbreak of COVID at that facility. The attorney went to visit her client at Morningstar on June 27th of this year, and that was the day after the governor's proclamation regarding the mandatory use of masks went into effect. When she was there, she observed that no staff at the facility wore face coverings. Within a few days of her visit, she was forwarded an email from her client's caseworker at Morningstar informing her that an individual had tested positive for COVID-19 at the facility. At some point later, she was informed of the outbreak and told that her client would not be able to participate in any further visits with his mother because visitation for all of the youth in care at Morningstar was being suspended due to the COVID-19 infections at the facility. She was later advised that even virtual visitation was suspended because the staff was concerned that the children would spread the virus via the equipment used for such visits. Virtual visitation didn't commence again for a month. Her client, the attorney later, about 9 days later, developed symptoms, went in for testing, and her test was inconclusive, and then about a week or two later, she was given another test, which was negative. Her doctor said that she presumes that she was in fact positive for COVID. Her client has now just of this week started in-person visitation with his family again. He also was not able to have any visits with his sister and baby brother, who he missed extremely and was very, very distressed. In addition, she reported that There's been reports of other virtual visitations occurring since the governor's order went into effect, and staff still continued to not wear masks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill, for that public comment. Next up, we have Maria Hudson, and I will unmute you now. You should be good to go.
Hi, my name is Maria Hudson. I'm a parent, and I'm listening to parts of your discussion, and I have grave concern. Because currently we have a system in which, whether a child is in foster care or not, my child is not, if they experience child abuse at school, CPS does not take the steps to fulfill their mandatory reporter's duties to investigate the circumstance, at least in our case. My child is disabled. We have had documented acts of medical abuse and mental health abuse reoccurring. This most recent school year, promotion to suicidality, that is documented. We have asked our CPS office out here to investigate it. I sent to them the 1988 Attorney General opinion written by Ken Eikenberry that they have the authority. At their discretion, they are able to investigate. My daughter has been promoted to suicidality and other acts of abuse that are documented with expressed admittance of these acts of child abuse and public disclosure requests we've received stating we were negligent today. I have 4 negligent staff. I need to start looking for another job. The most important thing here is 2 things. Compulsory requirements of children who are with their parents, such as my child, or foster kids, to not have access to safety from school administrators who create educational gaps. We have had situations of mendacity about my daughter's behavioral reports that we've had to have overturned. We've been taken through a retaliatory truancy. They need to be audited for the veracity of the filing of claims against foster students with regard to truancy and other things that are occurring. We know this because we've experienced it. My concern is that it's a constitutional violation to be in a safety and educational desert with labels of at-risk youth or foster care youth who don't have access to safety, because if they're being abused or lied on by school administrators, the presumption is that they're decent people and it's not being investigated. My daughter has attorneys, plural, and her mother to protect her. But what we know from our personal experience, okay, and what we're suing for with regard to safety and mendacity and falsification of records, foster care children don't have access to that. Animals have better protections for abuse in both public and private situations, okay? CPS should not stop at the door of schools. And vulnerable adults have better protections in both public and private entities. To presume that the pathology is just with a child by labeling them from cradle to grave as an at-risk youth, or families as indigent, poor, and other racial forms of bigotry and discrimination has to stop, because we are not protecting people who are subject to compulsory compliance to be in that school with their abusers. Domestic violence victims can separate from their abusers. And adults don't have to attend hostile work environments, being called nigger, being called faggot, being called cunt, being hit, kicked, punched, and a failure to protect because mandatory reporters violations where we have actions of child abuse that have not been investigated or put before a prosecutor for charging decision has to stop. So one of the things we need to look at is policy, because at current placement, if a administrator abuses a student, they have no recourse. And the presumption is the pathology is with the student, whether foster child or in the care of their family. And that's something that has to be looked at. And I can assure you that with our attorneys, we are absolutely putting this before the state of Washington, because it is a constitutional violation that CPS stops at the door of school administrators abusing our children with impunity.
All right, thank you very much for that comment, Maria.
And and I'd like to be contacted because the evidence that we have in this case, someone needs to explain to me why Attorney General Ken Liu told me the other day that I am correct, that the responsibility is for CPS to investigate this child abuse. Okay? They have the authority to do it, and my child should not end up dead. And she had a suicide attempt this year because of child abusing administrators and their failure to protect her.
All right. Thank you again for that comment, Maria. We will move on to our final comment, which is from Lori Lippold.
Hi, everybody. Lori Lippold with Partners for Our Children. And first of all, I appreciate that you do public comment so that you can hear from people who have very important things to share. So I'll just be very quick. Three things. One is back to the subject of criminal history and background checks. This is so pervasive, and I think as we're looking at some of the ways in which we have created barriers for people, whether it's for certification programs or education, licensing or jobs, that how I hope that kind of looking across the spectrum, and frankly, I will admit that I had in a lot of meetings and a lot of years spent talking about the impact of background checks. It just hasn't come up much that what's happening with, well, I guess it would be more recently with the JR to 25, that population and kind of this situation that they are now finding themselves in. And I certainly would want to make sure that any efforts to deal with the barriers from criminal history and background checks positively impacts the young adults who would be coming out of institutions like Green Hill, et cetera. So at over 21 years old. So yeah, so I hope that we can continue to work on this issue and make some significant changes. With respect to visitation, I guess one of the things as an oversight board, it strikes me that there continue to be kind of, and I know there's not a cookie cutter approach or one size fits all, but pretty significantly different practices among the different areas. So for residential treatment programs through BRS or child welfare, the parents doing parent-child visitation, that is different than clearly what we're hearing today about the JR facilities. So it's just kind of interesting to think about the cross-system policies and practices with something like visitation in mind. And there have to be safe ways to have visits occur with parents and youth and young adults in the institutional settings, I would imagine. The other point is around the behavioral health, and the work group was mentioned by Gordon, and I think I just wanted to point out, I'm sure many of you are aware of this, there is the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group, and they have a subcommittee on youth and young adults. So I want to make sure that we have that cross-system, cross-pollination, so as people are talking about potential solutions that we can connect. I don't know how you all feel. For me, just listening and knowing your agendas are always so packed that you don't have time to have conversation and discussion. But I would hope, because there was so much information presented, particularly by the youth and young adults, that it would be great to hear kind of where the oversight board envisions going with some of that. So thank you very much. I'll stop.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. That wraps up our public comment section for this time, so I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, everybody, for your public comments. Really appreciate that. Just as we heard from the Youth out in the field is very important for us to hear from the public, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and concerns with the Oversight Board and the staff who are still joined us and with us today. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Vicky Ibarra, who is going to do some follow-up from our meeting in July, and appreciate you joining us again. Dr. Ibarra.
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be back with you today to follow up on some of the questions we received last time. Nicholas, I've shared my screen. Can you just confirm that you can see it? Yes, okay, great.
Yep, you're all good.
So, great, thank you. So what I've done with to try to put together the information to answer these 8 follow-up questions is I've given you some information in the form of a slide deck. I've added it as an addendum to our last slide deck just so you have it all together. But I'll start today with just the additional information. So you have the information as a reminder of what we reviewed in terms of racial disproportionality data from the July meeting, and now you have the additional slides. In addition, there were 2 of these questions that led to sort of deeper dives into information. I'll reference those 2 additional sheets that you've been provided as summary information. I won't go over them here, but you have that additional detail, and I'll reference it when we get to the appropriate slide. Nicholas, just so you know, I'm not able to see the chat box, so we'll rely on you to monitor questions, and I'll hope to have time for questions even within my allotted time. So first of all, the first question was related to kindergarten readiness and how it is different by rural and non-rural districts. Recall we presented racial ethnic differences in kindergarten readiness, as well as foster care, non-foster care differences, but not rural and non-rural. So here I have for you 2 additional pieces of information. I have a map that shows the kindergarten readiness by district. Higher readiness is darker color, so the light areas of the state, those school district boundaries you see in light, have the lowest rates of kindergarten readiness, and those in the darker shades have the highest rates. I thought maybe we would see a pattern just looking at the state as a whole, and we really don't. There are high and low districts scattered throughout the states in the rural and urban areas of the state. So I connected with OSPI. They have a couple of different definitions they use for rural districts depending on the federal program or state program. They suggested that for my general purpose here, that we use the definition of fewer than 1,000, fewer than or equal to 1,000 total enrollment. So I did that. It's about half of the districts of the state, but represents only about 3% of Washington's kindergartners. Using this definition, students in rural districts in the state are meeting kindergarten readiness at 47.3% in the 2019 WACKids, compared with non-rural districts at 51%. So there is a difference, as I think was suspected in the question. The second slide I have for you with additional information relates to additions that people wanted to see on this child welfare disproportionality bar chart. So we've added a few things here. Starting from the left, you'll see that I've added a reference population, the Washington state population of children under 200% of federal poverty. This is something we're going to start using more and more as a reference point in many of our disproportionality discussions. So I felt like it was worth adding here as well. I've added, at the request of the questions that came from the board, I've added 2 additional sort of clusters here, bar chart clusters. The first is this placement cluster. Folks wanted to see kinship, non-kinship placement. I've also added group care because those are the 3 big buckets of placement that we monitor. So you see here kinship placement, non-relative foster care placement, and group care. These are children who are in care at any given period of time, fiscal year 19, what the racial ethnic breakout looks like for those groups of kids. The next new cluster is the following cluster. This was The request, I believe, was to look at how children are exiting care. So you see there on the left total exits in fiscal year 2019, what that looked like in terms of race, ethnicity, and then breaking out subcategories of those total exits: reunification, adoptions, and guardianship. I also changed some language here. There was some confusion I think I caused by using the term placed here instead of out-of-home care. So on this out-of-home care chart, the data are the same as what you saw before, but I have changed the language from placed to out-of-home care, which is more consistent with what we see across other reports from the agency. So those are the revisions I've made to this chart based on the request. There was a request to provide the link for the JR Integrated Treatment Model report. I referenced this report in the last couple of slides in the July presentation. We did have some recommendations in the JR Integrated Treatment Model report related to equity and disproportionality. So I've provided you the link to the full report. It is very large. It's large because we retained researchers with expertise in each of the therapeutic models that are included in the integrated treatment model. They each completed their own report, and their entire reports are included as appendices. In addition, we had Dr. Andrew Fox on our research team develop a summary report that serves as the front end of the document. So with the appendices, this is a very large document. If you're interested in the summary, I'd suggest reading Dr. Fox's summary on the front. The report overall we think is excellent. The work of the experts was great and points to important opportunities for improvement. I've also given you the link here to the newly designed reports page. DCYF has redesigned our reports page to make it easier to find reports. We hope easier to find reports, so you've got the link there too. The fourth question I attempted to answer, I am going to take a few slides here to answer this one. Co-Chair Kagi asked the question about early achiever standards. Are we seeing disparate impacts for providers of color? And for those of you who maybe work less in the early learning space, Early Achievers is the state's quality rating and improvement system. It was codified in 2015 in the Early Start Act, which put the system in place and required that licensed childcare providers who were taking state subsidy for children who were not yet in school, so children under 5, required them to go through the Early Achievers system, to go through quality rating and improvement, and gave deadlines for when certain benchmarks needed to be reached. As a part of that act, the legislature instructed DEL, now DCYF, to provide services and monitor data in a way that would let us know if the new system was providing adequate opportunities for success for providers of color and non-English speaking providers. So this is something we've reported on in every Early Start Act annual report since 2016, and I've given you the tables and the chapters where you can find that information. But until Co-Chair Kagi raised the question, we'd not been asked to sort of pull all that together and look back over time as a whole. What does that deadline, what do the meeting of these deadlines look like, and does it appear as though we may have some disparate impacts? So we appreciate the opportunity to answer this question in a way that's sort of cohesive and pulls all the information together. Overall, we found that at each of the deadlines, there were 4 deadlines between 2016 and 2019 that we had to report on. Providers of color and non-English speaking providers as a group have performed as well or better than white and English only providers, and I'll show a table that summarizes that. In addition, this is a new finding that has not been reported previously. The rate of retention from that initial 2016 cohort, this huge cohort of providers that were required to go through these first deadlines of early achievers, the initial retention of those from the 2016 through the 2019 deadlines was much higher for providers of color than white providers, 75% retained versus 60, and much higher for non-English speaking providers than English only providers, 86% versus 57. So I have to conclude, looking at the data, that this is a success story and a real strength of how Early Achievers has been implemented, not just by the agency, but primarily through our community partners who have been the eyes and ears actually implementing Early Achievers. I'll share just a few pieces of data. As I said, there's more detail in the couple of sheets that I put together for you that were handed out. This is a summary table that shows the 4 deadlines described in the legislation from 2016 through December 31st, 2019. There was an enrollment deadline by which time all providers who were in the required bucket of providers had to be enrolled in Early Achievers. There was a 2017 deadline by which time they had to meet their level 2 requirements. December 31st, both of these last 2 deadlines occurred on December 31st, but for statistical purposes, I'm reporting on them separately. There was a deadline for rating. They had to be rated by December 31st, 2019. And then they had to be rating a level 3 by that date. Not only did they have to be rated, but they had to be rated a level 3. And what I've done here is report on all the providers who reported as white, all the providers who reported as providers of color. And then I also have reported the unknown missing, because this still makes up a fairly large group of providers. So I didn't want to leave them off and have to think about where they were. I've put them in especially as a group. So when a provider registers for Early Achievers, race, ethnicity, and language are some of the questions that they're asked. They're asked a lot of other questions, but those are some questions they're asked. These are still voluntary questions, as race, ethnicity is in most data systems. That's an appropriate thing to do. And what it means is that, especially at the beginning, we had a lot of providers choosing not to report what race, ethnicity, or language they were. Because we know a facility doesn't have a race, ethnicity, or a language, for family home providers, generally when these are registered, the primary contact is the owner-operator. Family home providers are generally small businesses owned and operated by the same person in their home. When centers register, they identify a primary contact who is usually the lead administrator or perhaps the owner. And it's that person's race, ethnicity, and primary language that we're reporting here. A center, through the life of its operation, may turn over staff and may choose to appoint somebody else as the primary contact. So for a center, it is possible for their race, ethnicity, and language to change over time. But for family home providers, we generally see this as stable over time. What we see here is that for the 2016 enrollment, for example, almost 90% of white providers met that deadline and were enrolled. Of those who were required, subsidy providers serving subsidy children under 5, 90% enrolled, compared to 97.5% of providers of color. And if you note, the numbers are fairly equal here. This entire beginning cohort was over 3,300 providers. And what you see in the numbers here are just that cohort. So it's not all Early Achievers providers you see here, but that initial very large cohort that was subject to these prescriptive deadlines. This was a large cohort and about split halfway between white and providers of color. In terms of English, 100% of both those reporting English and those reporting non-English languages met that initial deadline. There was a group of providers that chose not to tell us what their primary language was, and many of those did not make that deadline, so they were not a part of those initial. If we skip over to the last deadline, which is what I'm going to show you some detail on, we see similar numbers here. 95% of white providers who were rated by December 31st of 2019 rated at least a level 3, compared with 94.3% of providers of color. You see here the difference in retention of this initial large cohort in 2016. we still have the vast majority of the providers of color. Over 1,000 of them made it those 3 years through those deadlines, whereas only 816 of the original white providers are still in place. Similarly, for language, almost 95% of the English-only providers rated a level 3, and 95% of non-English providers rated a level 3. And similarly, we see very high rates of retention here for non-English. I've given you this detail on the sheet. I just wanted you to orient you to this. I won't go through it in terrible level of detail, but on the left here, you see a bar chart that's going to show the race ethnicity of the primary provider, broken out by centers and family homes. So what percentage of those providers who were required to meet this deadline, what percentage meant the deadline? So it just gives you a little bit more detail than what's on the first chart. Same deadline, the 2016 enrollment deadline, and then the detail on language. We have a lot of language diversity in early achievers, in the licensed provider base in the state, and that's all related to who the children are and what communities they're in. But the largest non-English language groups consistently in our state are Spanish and Somali. So although these bar charts treat every group as equal, it's really those two languages that make up the most non-English, and you see they're doing quite well, at least at the beginning here. Where you see big outliers here that look like they're doing quite poorly, or outliers the other way, doing quite good, usually that's a reflection of very small numbers. So for instance, here under Korean, only 67% of the family homes who reported a primary language of Korean made this deadline. There were 3 providers in that category. So 2 of them made it, 1 chose not to. So these are very small numbers here. I've also provided the same detail in the slide for the 2019 December 31st level 3 deadline. And you have all of the other deadlines in the sheet, the supplemental sheet that I gave you. Okay, moving on to the next question. Question number 5. There was a question about family reunification, definition, and exact percentages. So this had to do with the conversation we were having about the bar chart and my attempt to estimate out of my head what the reunification rate was. In fiscal 19, the reunification rate was actually 65.7%, so almost 66%. For federal AFCARS reports, we use a definition that has to do with exit cohorts. So of children exiting in any given year, the reunification rate is the number of children reunified with parents over the number of children who exited over the same period of time. We do report the number of children reunified each year. And on the right here, you see the bar chart from our agency performance dashboard. Those links work, those hyperlinks work. So if you link through on the electronic version of the PDF of these slides, you can get to the agency performance dashboard where this chart is found under resilience. You can also get to the federal AFCARS adoption and foster care statistics and see how Washington State compares with other states. Okay, question number 6 had to do with the definition of placed and its relationship to not placed. Again, I think this had to do with my use of terms. I've gone back and changed the word placed in the bar chart to now say out of home care, which I think may help clarify some of this. So I apologize for any confusion my use of language may have caused. Here I just explained that placed was intended to indicate children placed in foster care, and not placed would indicate those children that had came into the system with an open CPS case who did not lead to placement in out-of-home care. Rather, the case was closed following either a CPS investigation or a FAR intervention. So there's no relationship between not placed and reunification. Reunification is only a potential option for exit from placement, whereas not placed would indicate children who did not enter out-of-home care. So I've changed that language and apologize for any confusion. This was a really interesting area to explore. So many of you noticed in some of the disproportionality index charts that I showed you from our disproportionality report, our annual report, you noticed a decrease in the disproportionality index and the placement rate for American Indian Alaska Native children that happened in 2016. This was previous slide 10. And the decrease actually started, it looked like, from those charts back in 2012 and had continued through 2017. Generally speaking, I try to caveat that we can't answer complex why questions with descriptive data. Descriptive data tell us what happened. They don't necessarily tell us why it happened. So I'll disclaim some of this with that caveat. But I did inquire with a number of leaders in the organization. I asked regional leaders, QA leaders, program leaders, tribal affairs staff, as well as our own staff in OIAA who've been producing the data for years and years. And the responses I got back were in these three buckets. There were some data-related changes that people told us about, a lot of data-related changes. There was one big policy change that may have impacted it, and there were some practice-related changes. So you'll see in the 2 pages that I put together to detail this, that we tried to validate whether these suggested contributors may have actually feasibly contributed, tried to look at the data we did have. It does look as though the data-related changes, so a lot of cleanup work that was done in 2012, 2013, 2014, and ongoing at the insistence of the WASRDAC, the Washington State Disproportionality Advisory Committee of the former Children's Administration. It does look as though that probably made some difference. The other things we think may have well contributed to this were the closer work with tribes and actually moving children from the DCYF ICW caseload to tribal caseloads. That very well could have had something to do with it. There was the suggestion that FAR may have also played a role here, and while we weren't able to confirm based on the 2 large funded evaluations of FAR, we weren't able to confirm that was the case. We did identify that the WISP evaluation makes some suggestions that it could have. So that is a possible as well. There also was a 0.3 point decrease in the disproportionality or the rate of American Indian Alaska Natives coming into intake during that period of time. And since we know that disproportionality in placement is driven in large part by disproportionality at intake, it's likely that contributed to a small part of the decline. So the bottom line here is it's likely there were multiple factors that contributed. Given the time and resources available, we weren't able to determine precisely how much each of these contributed, but it was an interesting inquiry that I think led us to some practices that probably did contribute to this decline during that period of time. And finally, the last question. Did the ERDC report on kindergarten readiness for children in foster care, did it split out the foster care findings for kin and non-kin? And remember, this followed our look at kindergarten readiness. Again, the observation that the social emotional domain was where foster children were least likely to be ready, and interest in this kin versus non-kin difference. I've got an active hyperlink here to the report on the ERDC website that you can pull. It did not split out. I took a closer look at it. It did not split out foster care findings for kin versus non-kin, but we agree this is an interesting area to consider. We have an active research agenda involving WAKIDS linked data, and over the coming year, we'll be dipping into that complex linked data set to do a lot of analyses. So we've added this question to that list, and we will be able to answer the question, is the social emotional finding different for kin versus non-kin foster children? We'll be hoping to get the linked data sometime soon from ERDC, and once we have that, we'll be able to start on this very large research agenda for this large set of linked data. In addition, in the coming year, we're pursuing an inventory and analysis of where in our system are we assessing the social and emotional development of young children. It's being assessed many places, and we think there's an opportunity to identify cross-system prevention and intervention places. For instance, Doug Klinman, one of our researchers, has just completed an evaluation of all the assessments we use in child welfare. And he identified that often in the CHET assessment, when children go into foster care, young children are being identified with social, emotional, developmental challenges that don't appear to have been identified earlier. So we think if we can get a handle on where this is happening system-wide, we can identify opportunities for prevention and intervention for young children earlier. So I think between these two research projects that are coming up this upcoming year, we should get a much better handle on this area, and appreciate the question. So with that, those are the our responses to the questions that I left with from our last meeting. Happy to answer any additional questions these may have raised.
Thank you, Vicki. And I love that you ended on the social emotional learning part, which just wanted to reemphasize, or it just highlights you coming back and just some of your statements of, I apologize if it wasn't clear. Thank you for these questions. We are doing better. It's very amazing modeling to everyone about humility and about admitting mistakes and being better, or even just, you know, the listening and the response. So thank you for modeling such amazing leadership and the incredible work that you do and the detailed data. So thank you for that. Are there any questions from staff or from for Vicki, Dr. Ybarra, from the board?
I have one, of course. This is Ruth. Thank you very much, Dr. Ybarra, for this really, really excellent analysis. I would love to get a copy of the research outline for the analysis you're going to do of WACIDS data, and am wondering if at last the original vision of linking early learning data to WACIDS data, so we can tell where we're being successful and not, if that will be possible.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm happy to share with you our IRB application, which lists our entire plan for those data. ERDC, we work with ERDC, as you know, to link the data. They function as the place that links our data. I started at DEL in 2016, and we've been working with them since then. Our agency contributes an annual load of early learning data so that they have access to it and can use it for their own research and reporting purposes. They've stood up a nice ECAP dashboard. They've got some other projects they've done with it. In addition, we've worked with them to get back linkages, two big linkages. 2016 was the first time, the 2016 entering kindergarten class, where we got back data linking ECAP, childcare, ESIT, and WACIDS, with all of that together, and conducted some really rich analysis. It did not have Head Start data, so we've been working for 3 years to try to get Head Start data into the data set. It did not have child welfare data because we were not a part of the child welfare agency at the time. And it stopped the OSPI kindergarten data, the OSPI data stopped at kinder. With the 2019 link, what we've asked for is up to 3rd grade, so that we get the 3rd grade outcomes, including discipline and expulsion. So we know that our kids in child welfare are much more likely to experience those outcomes, so we're hoping to get that as well. It will include all of our early learning data, including a subset of home visiting, which has been really challenging to get into this, and including our child welfare data. We've been working for 6 months and we haven't gotten it yet, so we're hoping that we're close to actually getting the data. It's a heavy lift. It's hard to do. And I think ERDC might say that they aren't adequately staffed to do all that we're asking them to do. But they do a fine job. The other place that linked data to WAKIDS is happening is in the WISUP evaluation. As you know, Early Start Act requires that WISUP do the outcome evaluation for Early Start so that the state knows the outcomes that are being produced. We've worked closely with WISUP over the last 2 years to help them scope that analysis, to make sure they understand the variables they're getting, and ERDC has put a ton of time into making sure they get what they need. So, so those data are being used for those kinds of big outcome analyses as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. Well, I want to make sure that we keep us on time, which we are doing to the minute, I have to say, after this segment. So thank you very much, Dr. Ibarra, for being here and for all the follow-up on our questions. And of course, all of this data will continue to be available if anyone wants to continue to examine and explore it once again. We are now going to welcome Allison Krutzinger from DCYF, who is going to talk about request legislation for this coming year as it is so far.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, hi Allison.
Great, hello everyone. I'm gonna share my screen here and then I'm gonna try and adjust things so I can still see what I'm looking at. All right, is that large enough for folks to see? I wonder if I can just do it like this. Is this large enough for folks to see? Okay. This is the wrong presentation. What did I do? Hold on, I have 2 PowerPoints up. Oh, I closed the wrong one. Ah! Well, I'm finding the right one. Sorry, this is why I should never be in charge of this. Ah! Well, I'm finding the right one. What I am gonna chat with folks, with you all today about is our process leading up to the 2021 legislative session, our agency request legislation, and our decision packages. So I will talk through both the realities that we are navigating, the directions and instructions we have, or our authorizing environment that we're living within. We'll spend most of our time talking about the content of what's in our right now in current form, our agency request legislation and decision package proposals. And then I'll talk a little bit about our process, our stakeholder engagement process along the way that has led to some evolutions and changes, which is why we certainly do that. So go ahead and dive right in. I just did that. So I like to start with this slide. I imagine many folks on this call are intimately familiar with the legislative process, but there may be some who are not. And I think it's a helpful visual grounding of the timeline and the process and sort of what happens leading up to a legislative session. It really describes nicely the roles that the 3 entities who are primarily engaged in this process play. So across the top is a visual mapping of, in blue, is the role the state agency plays. So that would be DCYF. The middle is purple, and that's the role the governor's office and the Office of Financial Management play. And then the green, obviously, is the Washington State Legislature. So we are firmly in mid to late August, and so you can see where we're at in the timeline here. We're at that place where agencies are submitting requests, beginning to get ready to submit their final requests to OFM and the governor's office for approval. From there, the governor will take it and use what agencies send him to build his priorities and his budgets. And then obviously the legislature comes back to town in January and makes decisions. Another timeline slide that I want to share that I just think is important for how DCYF has approached the work this interim. Again, as you all know, we're 2 years old. I started as the deputy director in November, and so really hit the ground running in session. And so we worked during the tail end of session and in the midst of COVID to build a process that we will refine and learn from, as it's the first year we've done this, but a process around internal and external expectations, timelines, stakeholder engagement, feedback. And so you can see here on the screen just some of the milestones that we've walked through. We definitely start with an internal drafting phase, idea solicitation phase, formally in June after we get instructions from the governor's office and OFM. We then moved into review and approval of concepts by leadership, stakeholder engagement, drafting along the way. We are very quickly next week approaching our internal deadline or milestone to submit those to leadership for final review. They'll make final decisions on what we submit. We'll then submit those in on September 14th or sooner, and then we'll move into additional stakeholdering and next steps. The other thing that I'll note is, you know, we recognize and we have to, unfortunately, often live within timelines, deadlines, and expectations. And we know those calendared deadlines and expectations often prohibit sometimes intentional and meaningful feedback. And so as I have approached this work this interim, and we'll continue to approach this work as we lead up to session, through session, and next year, as we have met with stakeholder groups, advisory bodies, I've really made the point that we want this to be a continuous conversation. Yes, DCYF has to follow deadlines. We do have to submit things. And that doesn't mean the conversation stops or there isn't opportunity for continued input and continued engagement, because things can certainly shift, things can certainly change, and we certainly want to be an active thought partner with community, with providers through the entire year, and not just sort of at these segments when we're expected to. So we'll continue to refine our process over the next year. We'll continue to work on that, get feedback about how it went this year, make changes as necessary. But I do like to caveat for folks that we have deadlines, there is a calendar and a schedule we have to follow, and we want to continue conversations outside of those and be able to use our role as a state agency to influence the governor and work with community and partners and the legislature ongoing on topics. So just thought that would be helpful. I will note we have had, between myself and my government affairs team, we have probably had conversations with over 75 different stakeholder groups since May through our agency request legislation and development process and DP development process. Some of those with DCYF advisory bodies, some of those with advocacy groups and stakeholder groups that we meet with, both sort of global, broader coalitions or specific partners or entities, with organizations, with provider groups. And so we have really tried, be it not perfect and be it there is always room for improvement, we have really tried to, in the midst of everything going on, leverage the technology aspect of this and communicate with as many folks as we can about our ideas and solicit feedback while there's still time, while we're still refining them. So moving on to sort of what we're dealing with, no surprise to this body at all, that the reality that we're walking into, given the budget reality, given the impacts of COVID, the impact on our personal lives, the economy, we're walking into a pretty significant deficit for the next biennium. Right now, or this was a June number, but at the June forecast, it was estimated that that deficit could be anywhere between in the mid $4 billion range for the biennium. So that absolutely influences our authorizing environment and the directions that we are given by OFM and the governor's office around decision packages and around agency request legislation. We received pretty concrete direction that we needed to submit reduction decision packages for our agency. And so I'll talk about that as part of this as we go, but I just want folks to know that there was an expectation of that. Slide has a lot of words. We certainly can share this. I'm not going to read through these things, but these are some of the highlights of the direction that we were given, both from OFM and the governor's office when it comes to DPs and agency request legislation. I bolded clearly limited fiscal impact. Both the legislature was, both the governor's office and OFM were very clear that this is not the time for big, bold spending ideas that are new, but rather the time to be focused, be mission critical, and think about ways to promote agency culture, but also be mindful of cost. I think the one area that we're leaning into is looking at funding to eliminate racial and ethnic disparities. This was called out in both the decision package and agency request legislation development. I think you all heard from young people this morning who have been involved in our juvenile justice system, and Rebecca Kelly, our interim assistant secretary for JR. One of the themes you'll see in our agency request proposals for 2021 is a focus on the juvenile rehabilitation system and how we do better, frankly, in that system. So these are just some of the directions and the realities that we're grappling with. I think it's just important to note that while DCYF cares about many things and has many priorities that we are administering, when it comes to what sort of moves through our funnel and what we're able to submit, we do have to follow rules, and we do have to follow direction of our authorizing environment. This doesn't mean we aren't supportive of things that we don't submit. It doesn't mean that we aren't supportive of other concepts, and certainly can be a voice and a tool and a thought partner on other ideas and work on other ideas throughout. But as far as what we are formally able to submit, we're really bound by the instructions of our authorizing environment, which sometimes feels a little squishy or icky. I'm not sure what the right word is. So this gosh, it's fall now. This spring, we had developed and worked on some guiding principles when we went into the first budget reduction exercise. So folks will remember in June, we were asked to submit a budget reduction exercise to OFM for fiscal year 21 and then beyond. We did that. Through that process, we developed and worked with advocates and stakeholder entities. I think the Oversight Board submitted a wonderful set of guiding principles and how DCYF should be considering those things. So our guiding principles really around that process are true to our work through where we're headed for 2021. I noted that we've talked to lots of stakeholders through this process, and so this continues to evolve. And folks who may have seen this presentation a couple of weeks ago noticed that it might look slightly different because we've made some different choices and decisions based on other current administrative work that's happening, especially in the child care space. We have removed those things from the legislative proposal agenda. I'm trying some other strategies and working on some administrative work in the meantime. So for folks who have seen this before, it's slightly different. That's part of the iterative and feedback process. So just want to make sure folks are aware of that. As we're looking to 21 session, the legislative session, here are the buckets, the 3 buckets or areas that we're sort of landing on. Some because we have to, and some because it's how have emerged and what we've bubbled up to. The first is this concept around agency culture. DCYF is 2 years old. We've entered the toddler phase of life. We're sort of at that juncture in our evolution around, we've learned a lot more. We've learned a lot more around the various buckets of work that we have. How do we integrate better? How are we more innovative? How do we do better and serve better? And so this bucket has a variety of things in there. And like I noted previously, we do have a pretty comprehensive package, 2 decision packages and 1 piece of agency request legislation around less restrictive environments, more therapeutic environments for young people who come into the JR space. And then unfortunately, the required 3rd bucket is our reduction options. We don't have a choice. So that is a bucket. So I'm gonna start with, my computer has frozen. Uh-oh. Oh, there it goes. Okay. I'm going to start with our first bucket, agency culture, and a couple of pieces of agency request legislation that we're still working through the approval process and refining. I will note that clearly COVID has had an impact on every aspect of our lives, and session could look really different this year. It may not be the standard congregation in Olympia as we are all used to. I don't know what I will do if that's not the case, but given social distancing expectations, the pandemic that we're all grappling with, session could look different. And so I'll just caveat to say that while we have 4 or 5 pieces of agency request legislation in the queue that we're considering, that number could be reduced once we sort of understand the reality of session. It is, if session reality looks different and things are limited, we will certainly be strategic and mindful about the agency request legislation that we are putting forward. Sorry, Secretary Hunter is texting me, but he can wait. So a couple of pieces of legislation that I want to talk about here. There are 3 noted on this slide. I'll note that the QRT piece of legislation is actually going to be folded into a larger omnibus licensing innovation bill, and so that will help reduce the volume here. But we have a couple of pieces of legislation that are aimed at serving young people in extended foster care. The first is really to clarify in statute that youth dependent and tribal court are still eligible to enroll and re-enroll in extended foster care. This happens in practice most places across the state, but the statute doesn't technically allow it. And so we want to clarify that this is allowable and this is a good thing for young people who are involved in tribal dependency courts to have access to the extended foster care services and supports as they get older. The other piece is expanding access to and placement options for young people in extended foster care in responsible living skills programs, or RLSP programs. Right now, a young person can enter that program as a 16 and 17 or 17-year-old and stay past their 18th birthday, but because the way the statute is written, they cannot enter those types of programs after they turn 18. And so we think that there's some potential to open up placement opportunities, stable placement opportunities for young people by removing that word minor from the statute, so young people who turn 18 or are 19 can enter those facilities. They're currently allowed to stay if they're already there, but they're not allowed to enter, so many of them serve a mixed age population. So that's another piece that we're looking at. And then the third piece on here around QRTPs is a technical fix to make sure that our state statute language that includes, is in compliance with the expectations around QRTP and group care facilities outside of Washington state. I'll caveat this to say we know there's been a lot of dialogue around out-of-state placement. We have done tremendous work to reduce the volume of out-of-state placement. We feel this is important, and we want to make sure our statutes are clear, because there is an out-of-state placement facility that we consistently use on the east side, on the Lewiston-Clarkston border, where the facility is actually in Idaho. But if you live in that Lewiston-Clarkston community, Idaho is much closer than Spokane or King County. And so it is an out-of-state placement. So technically, it is technically an out-of-state facility. And so this is really about making sure that our rules around QRTP are appropriate for usage of out-of-state placement. This concept will get rolled into the larger licensing bill that I'm going to talk about next. I'm going to skim this bill at high level, happy to provide a written summary in more detail. This bill is a carry forward from last year around licensing innovations, both in the child care licensing space as well as the foster care space. So a couple of things that I want to highlight that this bill will do. It will allow permanently outdoor early learning programs to be licensed. We have run a pilot for the last 4 years on exploration of how to license an outdoor program. The pilot was incredibly successful, lots of involvement from variety of people. So really just adding this as an option of programs that are available, types of programs that are available to be licensed. It does a couple of other innovative things for family child care providers, including allowing licensure of accessory dwelling units or buildings on a piece of property. Historically and previously, we've not been able to license buildings that were not the home, and so we want to clarify that in statute. We're having conversation after a very robust dialogue at our Early Learning Advisory Committee about another part of this bill that created an innovative hub model, so family child care providers could potentially operate multiple family child care homes. We had a really robust dialogue with our Early Learning Advisory Council about that, I think just last week, maybe the week before. The days run together now. And so we're evaluating what that looks like and how do we make sure that our intent is able to be met, and we are protecting, we are adding protections that would not create unintended consequences for business owners or employees of or potential family child care providers. So still working on that. There may be some, we may remove that. There may be some tweaks to that. We're still having dialogue about what that means. In the child welfare space, in the foster care licensing space, a couple of innovative approaches that we want to try, we want to make sure are included are around child-specific licenses. So a process that allows a child-specific license to be issued. We see this as a recruitment and retention strategy where someone may not necessarily want to have thought about entering into being a foster parent and have gone through a licensing process, but may have a relative or someone that they are close with that ends up involved and needing a safe place, and that person may want to choose to be licensed, but for a specific child. And so creating a pathway that allows for that will still allows us to maximize our federal funding. And then related, we are hopeful that we can create a definition of suitable other caregiver, or some have called fictive kin, which we are trying to find the right or better term for. We've gotten a lot of feedback on that. And so we're doing some exploration about what that could look like. But creating a definition of suitable other who could care for parent, and then this would accompany that child-specific license nicely, although both serve a purpose. And so there's opportunity for others to who may not be quote unquote blood relatives, but are, you know, much like a relative. I use the example that I had a grandma growing up who was my grandma, but really wasn't any of my parents' parents, but she was the closest grandparent I had because she lived in my town. And so how do we make sure that we are honoring those types of relationships within our child welfare system when caregivers may be needed for children? So those are a couple pieces there. It does a couple of other cleanup things. It looks at our regulation as well over the Washington State School for the Deaf and clarifies our role there. Pretty comprehensive, but happy to send a write-up, but those are a few of the highlights I would touch on. And then moving into a couple of decision packages in this bucket, we are going to get some Family First transition dollars. And so this is really about the statutory authority for us to expend our Family First Transition Act dollars, using these funds to begin implementation of the prevention plan, allow 4E funds, allow claiming of 4E funds for CPS workers for prevention services, which has been a barrier. In order, a small percentage of this a small amount of this money would go to changes in our IT system, as well as expanding our other service array and making changes in the casework system so we're prepared to implement the Family First Prevention Services Act in our plan. So that really is about seeking our approval to expend our federal dollars. These are federal dollars that we'd be spending, not general fund state. And then the other decision package in this space is around our group care WACs. So we have a set of WACs. We license, and through our licensing division, a wide variety of group care settings. We license group care settings, BRS settings that serve dependent children that we also contract with, but we also license group care facilities that are run by DSHS or contracted with by DSHS for DDA services. Additionally, we license group care facilities that serve predominantly homeless youth or young people who are not typically involved in dependency. We license a variety of group care settings, and we have one set of WACs that governs the array of group care facilities that we license. And we have, through partnership with our advocates at WACHA and Mockingbird and the Washington Association for Children and Families, have had a lot of dialogue around this concept and the WACs, some of the challenges around these WACs, especially the education piece. And so we are making some administrative changes in the short and midterm around the waiver and around the education rules. But what we're proposing in this decision package is actually to go through a pretty comprehensive negotiated rulemaking process with our group care providers to create a set of WAC or a set of WACs that is responsive to the varying types of providers we serve. We want to do that modeled after what we did in the early learning space with our child care providers, where varying types of providers were at the table, and we were really talking through, dialoguing about those rules, building consensus about what the WACs should look like. To do that, it's quite laborious, and it requires additional capacity the department just doesn't have right now. It's a longer process, and it looks at all the WACs, and so we want to do it right if we're going to do it. The alternative was we could certainly have a staff person sit in a room and rewrite the WACs, but we missed the opportunity for stakeholder engagement. And so we're putting forward a decision package based on our conversations with advocates and stakeholders in this space, in hopes that we can undertake that work and really refine and redo those WACs so they are more appropriate for the types of entities that we license. Feel free to stop me also if you have questions as I am sort of blazing through this, this information relatively quickly. I'm going to pivot and talk. Actually, maybe I'll pause there and see if there's questions before I dive into the JR space.
Allison, this is Lois. Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. Hi. So I'm glad that that you've gone back to the table on the hub piece for homes. I know I expressed at ELAC, and I just want to express it here so it's on the record for this group, the concerns about unintentional consequences and having the whole thing that what makes family home providers great is having someone be able to own their own business. And I had expressed at ELAC, and I'll say it again here, the concern of having one person be the owner
and having family homes being able to operate out of different sites just basically sounds a lot like having centers that are in a home-based model without having all of the same regulations that centers have to make, as well as the possible exploitation of someone who, if they're new to this, to this field, or someone where English is their second language, but have not understanding that basically you're doing all the work, but I'm the one who's in control of the purse strings. So that in itself can lead to those type of unintentional consequences with this type of hub. So I, again, just wanted to say that out loud. I'm very happy to hear that you're rethinking that piece. Thank you.
Absolutely. The value of having dialogue with our partners in advance. So I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about the items in our juvenile rehabilitation space. So we are really leaning into how do we serve young people better, right? DCYF is charged in the JR space of sort of after a young person has gone through the court process and then they come to us to serve their sentence and in either our institutions or our community settings. I think you guys heard a lot about that this morning, and I will not claim to be an expert on how that works at all, but want to talk through some of the things we're hoping to do in this space. We are really looking at how do we create less restrictive environments for young people. Right now we have three institutions and 9 community facilities, 10 community facilities across the state. We have a percentage of our young people who are in one of our 3 institutions that are eligible to move into a community facility, but we do not have capacity in our community facilities. They are at capacity, and so we cannot meet the need or the demand, I would say, to move young people out of an institutional setting into a community setting. And what we know about where young people thrive and how young people develop, I think it goes without saying that the institutional setting is likely not the best environment for most young people, especially for an extended period of time. And so this is really about how do we create options and opportunities for young people who are in JR to be in JR, but be in a community setting, either through additional community capacity that we create, so community step-down facilities or community facilities. In community where there is education and job opportunity, I think that's very critical, and that's been part of our conversation internally. So it's not just about more community facilities, but it's about more community facilities in places where there's opportunity for young people to attend education and access employment opportunities. Also looking at options in lieu of incarceration to provide another step down. So can we alter, I think is the word I would use, or change how the concept of electronic home monitoring is utilized? Right now, we use that in a very limited scope, but could we change that premise and what that looks like and create options for young people to serve their sentence in their community setting? That would clearly need to come with wraparound support. So it's not just about we're in community good luck, but making sure those rehabilitative services come with that. And we are supporting young people in either a community facility or a community setting, including substance use treatment, case management, the connection to medical and healthcare, the connection to education that would work for that young person, any therapy, behavioral or mental health supports that would be needed. So really expanding, thinking about how do we create that for young people outside of an institutional setting when it makes sense and when it can be done. Also expanding reentry aftercare supports. So again, making sure that young people who exit either our institutional or community settings access to those aftercare supports to make sure their transition back into community is one that is successful. We also, in this decision package, are including a revamp a redo of our needs and risk assessment to address the disparities and bias that exist in that tool. So we use a risk assessment tool, and we would like to undertake redoing that. So it is a equitable tool that eliminates some of the biases that currently exist in that tool that our data has shown. So this is just some more about our options in lieu of incarceration agency request legislation, using potentially revamping how we use electronic home monitoring as a step down option to move young people out of JR facilities. And then thinking then about the aftercare support and transition support in communities and making sure that young people have access to those. And then the last decision package in the JR space is around providing necessary behavioral health services to youth. So right now, 58% of the young people who are identified as needing substance abuse treatment do not receive it. Our secretary feels incredibly strongly about this. This is a travesty and a disservice to the young people. And so I want to make sure that we can get substance abuse treatment, substance use disorder treatment available, as well as making sure that our dialectical behavioral therapy is provided to young people with complex mental health needs in culturally responsive ways and with fidelity to the model. So that's really about young people who are in an institutional or community setting as well, but making sure those exist. So I have one more note on our reduction exercise, on our reduction DPs that'll go pretty quick, but I want to pause there and see if there's any questions on the JR piece.
You cruised through that at record speed, I have to say. I'm very impressed, and literally exactly on time. Are there any questions from the board members? I am sure we will see.
Oh, I think you just muted yourself, Representative Sen.
Yes, I did. Thank you. I'm sure we will see you again and these again, and that these will not be the final packages. I do, again, want to underscore the budget situation for people on this call to understand that, as Allison presented, that we had a $4.3 billion projected deficit. Under our Constitution, we must balance this year's budget by the end of June. And so that means that whatever losses projected or deficit projected in this year, even when we come back into session in January, which wouldn't necessarily end till May, we don't meet before that, then we still have to make sure that the budget balances by the end of June. So new investments will be quite a challenge, let alone maintaining our current investments. So just want to make sure that people have a sense of the reality of what we're talking about in our budget situation. So thank you for that. And I should have said that at the beginning.
Most welcome.
Questions, say additional questions, but any questions or comments? All right, well, thank you very much for joining us, Allison and Frank, for staying with us. And we will just move into our closing segment. All right, and actually, I do just want to emphasize the great synergy between this department and our board. I understand that Wendy Thomas is now I hope I'm allowed to say this, is now a DCYF employee. And so I love, again, that there's this great synergy between these two entities, and look forward to that continuing. I do also just want to point our next meeting, which is in September, will be focused around early learning. And so we are working on that agenda as we speak. And I will turn it over to Ruth and to Krista for any final remarks as well. After, again, I just say thank you so much to the youth and the JR team who presented today. Again, it's always so impactful to hear the real voices. It just makes a real difference.
You're muted, Ruth. Hold on a second.
Just talking away. Thank you, Tana. And I completely agree with you. The voices of the youth are probably the most important that we hear in many ways. And their voices were really responsible for the traction that the JR to 25 bill received and its success in the legislature. So again, many thanks to those who participated today. I was particularly struck by the charts we didn't have time to discuss for JR. That there's one series of charts that show a dramatic drop in intake to JR from April. And obviously it's due to COVID, but where are those youth going? They're not going to JR. Has there been that big of a drop in arrests at the city and county level? So it just is kind of intriguing, and I think hopefully could give us some insight into how we could reduce entries. I mean, is there an alternative that that communities are using as instead of sending youth to JR?
Although I have to also imagine it's partly because courts are not really functioning so well.
Right.
But I think those are both a great question.
Right.
That's frankly what I was going to say, that, you know, they're not having trials. I mean, now they're starting to, but they haven't for a long time.
I just think it's something worth looking at. But I really commend DCYF for the work they're doing to really focus on how to improve and reform juvenile facilities and build up the community capacity. So that's all I have to say. I also, if Lois or anyone else has ideas about what the agenda for the meeting next month should be that will address early learning, those would be very welcome.
Great, thank you for that, Ruth. I'd be happy to work with you on that piece. I also have a suggestion that maybe the co-chairs and the team or everyone would consider, but I think when we have panels and different folk come in to present, it would be nice if we could add maybe a little bit more time on our agenda for those type of meetings, even if it's just half an hour, 15 minutes, where we can have a little bit more time for questions, especially since we are moving from not having questions in the chat box. You know, we still have the same amount of oversight duty where we used to have almost full day meetings. And I know how exhausting Zoom is for all of us, but even now, especially during this time of this public health emergency, our children need us more than ever. So just something for the co-chairs and the rest of the team to consider.
Are people willing to, if we, you know, added a half an hour and built in a little bit more, 15 minutes in the first half and 15 minutes in the second half for more Q&A? Are people willing to invest that extra half an hour in our in these meetings? People want to use, well, you can either use the reaction button with the thumbs up or send us a note, but yeah, we've been trying to keep it a sane amount of time, but maybe what we'll do is build in a 5-minute bio break in the middle of the meetings and then allow people to, or something like that. But that's great feedback. Thank you. All right, Krista or Nicholas, any closing remarks?
Just to say thank you everyone for your participation, and I know that there's a lot of interest from the board to have panels such as this. We are very fortunate to have the youth that we did today and also to represent across the state. So as Ruth said and Rep. Sen said, that we will work to organize our September meeting around early learning, and I believe we're talking about a provider panel at that time too. And then we're looking at kinship supports in October, and we will look to also incorporate a panel there as well. So it seems like that's a good stakeholder engagement piece, and as long as we have the time to accommodate that. So appreciate that feedback always. And we also, because of the time of year, which we just heard from DCYF, we're also going to start drafting our annual report. So just for board members to have the heads up that the next few meetings will also include time for the board to reflect and respond to drafts of that report that we will have to finalize in November. And with that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, for anyone that wasn't there, we will send out a doodle poll here shortly because our November meeting is scheduled for November 19th, but just to adhere to some submission timelines, we have to move that up a little bit. So if that's our final board review and approval of the annual report, we're going to do it a little bit earlier in November. We just need to figure out the right date for most board members. But with that, I appreciate everyone's attendance and participation today, and also any feedback. We know that the chat box thing is different this time, and feedback on that as well appreciated. We're just trying to make sure we're in compliance with several different competing needs and laws, but we can also get creative in that too. So any feedback is always welcome. But thank you all.
Thanks everybody for your participation.
Thank you. Have a good day.